Chapter 201, Invitation from the Council, Second Update. Lucian and Misaka Makoto arrived at the hospital together, and immediately they were met with rows upon rows of beds. Dozens of Misaka's sisters lay side by side, each undergoing a thorough medical examination. Ever since the accelerated growth drug had been administered, every clone needed careful monitoring. Complications were inevitable when you force 14 days' worth of development into seconds. Because night had already fallen, Mikoto couldn't return to the girls' dormitory. She'd missed curfew, and the mere thought of facing the dorm supervisor's wrath made her shudder. So she resigned herself to spending the night in the hospital, resting on one of the empty beds until the doctors finished their tests. Lucian, of course, accompanied her, though he wouldn't be going through the same battery of exams. Technically, there was little the hospital staff could learn from examining him. His body carried a unique fusion of physiologies from different worlds. Any congenital defects had long since been ironed out. Yet Lucian was more concerned about what might happen if Academy City researchers got their hands on his genetic data. Revealing the wizard's blood in his veins would send the city's scientists into a frenzy, and he had no intention of letting that happen. So Lucian told the nurses he was simply there to keep Makoto company. In truth, he planned to stay off the grid until the Misaka clones had been cleared and the council could be properly notified of his existence. After all, he still had that invitation to deliver. And if the authorities here discovered his true heritage first, his prospects would plummet overnight. As Makoto drifted into a restless sleep, Lucian leaned back in his chair and watched over her. Outside the ward's window, the neon lights of Academy City glowed in the distance. Somewhere out there, the council was waiting, and Lucian had a meeting they would never forget. The next morning, Lucian and Misaka Makoto were summoned to the hospital's chief physician, known only as the Underworld Soul Chaser. He led them into a quiet consultation room, his expression grave. "I'm afraid the test results aren't good," he began, flipping through a thick report. "Because these girls were given growth-accelerating drugs, their lifespans have been drastically shortened. Under current conditions, each of them has at most 2 or 3 years left." "Only 2 or 3 years?" Makoto's voice caught in her throat. She'd risked everything to rescue her sisters. Now their time was slipping away far too fast. The doctor nodded. "That's the typical outcome. However, there is a way to restore a normal lifespan, ongoing treatments to slow their cell division and hormone therapies to rebalance their bodies." Makoto felt a glimmer of hope until reality shattered it. "But," she began. He sighed. "There are over 10,000 of them. Academy City simply doesn't have the resources or infrastructure to provide such intensive long-term care, and the financial burden would be astronomical." Silence fell as Makoto and Lucian exchanged worried glances. They had a solution, but at a cost that seemed impossibly high. The board of directors had discovered the School Research Institute's secret experiments and were furious. They immediately agreed to cover every medical expense for the affected children and arranged for them to be sent to leading research facilities abroad for regular examinations and follow-up treatment. Lucian interrupted. "Could you please get to the point?" Misaka Makoto shot him an exasperated look. She and the Soul Chaser were old associates. He'd overseen countless sensitive operations in the past. There was no way the board could claim ignorance. After all, when he'd reviewed the mass production program for ability users, the documentation plainly stated that Academy City's most powerful supercomputer, known as the Tree Graph Designer, had been used. Their simulations showed the success rate for creating viable Misaka sisters would be under 1 Percy, which was why the project had been abandoned. And of course, nobody can access the Tree Graph Designer without express authorization from the board's highest ranks. This project was originally approved by the board of directors. Otherwise, with all the skirmishes between Accelerator and the Misaka sisters in Academy City, the higher-ups couldn't have looked the other way. But that's beside the point now. What really matters is that the council's top brass has agreed to make things right, and that's a relief. She isn't worried they'll defy orders and ship the sisters overseas for more experiments. She'll still visit those who remain here in Academy City, and with the Misaka network at her fingertips, she can monitor every single clone. Just as I thought, she murmurs, they're still valuable. Lucian wasn't surprised by the decision. As long as the Misaka sisters hold worth, the Council will protect them. What did give him pause was the fact they'd be dispersed among various foreign laboratories. Once they're sent abroad, bringing them back won't be so easy. They'll make new friends in those labs, settle into local routines, and it wouldn't be at all surprising if some chose never to return. Lucian paused for a moment, considering the bigger picture. Unless the Council's top brass left some hidden failsafe to control the Misaka sisters, he mused, it really doesn't concern me. As long as they can't track me down, why should I care? His true priorities lay elsewhere, tailing Makoto Misaka's body, figuring out how to advance his 4th-level ability to the 5th, and then exploring the world's magic to see if there was something valuable he could master. I'll come see you again when I have time, he promised her, offering a firm nod. With the immediate crisis among the Misaka sisters temporarily averted, Makoto reached out and shook his hand. If she didn't return by nightfall, her friends, especially her dorm mate and confidante Kuroko Shirai, would start to worry. To Kuroko, Lucian was just another Misaka clone, but one far stronger and more composed than, say, number 9982, who was always griping about Makoto's childishness. Makoto turned and walked away, disappearing into the corridor. The underworld soul chaser, who had been watching the exchange, finally stepped forward and addressed Lucian with a raised eyebrow. Are you absolutely sure you don't need a medical examination? Even if you somehow pushed your ability to level 4, the drug treatments would ravage your body. You wouldn't last more than 3 years, tops. I'll figure it out myself, Lucian shot back, brushing off the underworld soul chaser's offer of another checkup. With that, he turned on his heel and left the hospital alone. Now that he possessed a legitimate identity in Academy City, Lucian was free to come and go as he pleased. He'd briefly considered enrolling at Tokiwadai Middle School, where Misaka Makoto studied, to learn ability development firsthand and refine his powers under her guidance. But the more he thought about it, the more inefficient the plan seemed. The pace of a typical middle school curriculum would be far too slow for someone of his intellect. It made far more sense to gather specialized research papers and textbooks and study on his own. If he ever hit a snag, he could always hire a tutor. After all, Academy City was full of scientists and experts. As for Misaka Makoto herself, he didn't need to enroll in her school to see her. She often visited the hospital to check on the Misaka sisters, and he could just as easily run into her at Changtai-pan. In a city this big, opportunities to cross paths would present themselves soon enough. Lucian didn't get far beyond the hospital doors before he halted, his senses prickling. He spun on his heel and fixed his gaze on the tall trees lining the sidewalk. No matter how skilled a tracker was, they couldn't hide from someone with his psychic gift. A moment later, a young man with sun-bleached hair and a white lab coat stepped out from behind a broad maple. Tattoos crept over left his face, the ink dark against his pale skin. If you've got something to say, Lucian warned, voice low, just say it. Keep tailing me and you'll find out exactly how far I'll go. Instead of flinching, the stranger grinned, an unhinged, almost mocking curve of his lips. Your clone is fascinating, he purred. Far more alert than the original. Lucian's brow arched. The council? The blond man made a show of smoothing his coat, as if taking pride in the accusation. Sharp, I am Kihara Suda, leader of the Hound Unit under the council's direct command. We've been watching you for some time. He paused, eyes glittering. And now, they'd like to extend you an invitation. Join the unit. Think it over, won't you? Suda's grin widened until it verged on madness, and for a heartbeat, Lucian wondered if the man spoke in earnest, or if he was merely baiting him into a trap. Either way, there was no turning back now. Chapter 202, The First Step in Transformation. Update 1. Zizila. Lucian slammed his foot against the ground. In an instant, crackling electricity surged through the earth and struck Kihara Suda, making his whole body shudder. His blonde hair bristled wildly, and his knees buckled beneath him. What do you think you're doing? Suda rasped, grabbing a nearby tree to steady himself. His face was twisted in a furious scowl. Lucian regarded him coolly. Nothing personal, It's just that your grin was so unpleasant, I couldn't resist. Do us both a favor and keep that expression to yourself next time, unless you want another shock. Now, you said you wanted me to join you. What's in it for me? Pseudo took a steadying breath, forcing down his rage. You have a sharp mind and power to match. If you come aboard, we can fast-track your advancement from level 4 to level 5. Sound like enough incentive? He spoke without boasting. Lucian's recent performances, his use of Clone 9981, and the devastating atomic disintegration technique had already hinted at level 5 potential. With the right training regimen, he could likely make the breakthrough in under 6 months. That would give Academy City yet another elite level 5 combatant, and one of the most formidable fighters they'd ever seen. The chairman had personally ordered him to find a way to control Clone 9981 at any cost. As a member of the notorious Kihara clan, he was deeply intrigued by the idea of harnessing such a potent, mutation-born clone, and more than happy to take on the assignment. To him, science was the ultimate power. No matter how formidable an Esper's abilities, there was always a weakness to be uncovered. With enough observation and analysis, even Accelerator's lightning-fast reflexes could be anticipated and countered. Given time, he was confident he could isolate those vulnerabilities, turn Clone 9981 to their side, and forge him into the hunting team's deadliest weapon. Lucian nodded, impressed despite himself. He'd planned to dismiss the Kihara scientist and move on, but now he found the proposal hard to ignore. After all, who in Academy City knew Espers better or could push their powers further than the Science Council? Perhaps, he thought, this was an opportunity worth pursuing. Lucian studied Kihara Sutta for a long moment. After all, the Council had built all of Academy City and defined every ability level within it. If they were willing to raise him from level 4 to level 5, that would be infinitely faster than slogging through his own research, and it would give him the perfect excuse to step inside their inner circle, see exactly how the Council operated, and gather first-hand information about the world beyond. Could he be walking into a trap? He was confident not. Even now, they believed him to be nothing more than a highly capable level 4 clone, completely unaware of the true breadth of his magical abilities. So, he said, leaning forward, if the Council has any other requirements, I'm ready to hear them. Kihara Suda's eyes brightened at Lucian's interest, and he pressed his advantage. But Lucian cut him off before he could speak again. Let me be clear, he said, folding his arms. First, my salary and benefits must match or exceed whatever standards you set. Second, I keep my own schedule. I'll appear when I choose and decline when I must. Third, I'll accept missions at my discretion. Anything that crosses my moral line is off limits. Kihara Suda's brow went up in surprise. You've got a long list of demands, he observed. Lucian offered a wry smile. Just the essentials. I'd hate to be underpaid, overworked, or worst of all, compromised. No problem. I'm on board. Kihara Suda's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles before he nodded firmly. Good. The priority now is getting you formally enlisted in the Hound Force. Once you're in, we'll have all the time we need to devise a training regimen tailored to your strengths and get you to 5th level ability as quickly as possible. He tapped the remote in his hand. Within seconds, a sleek black sedan rolled to a stop at the curb. Lucian didn't hesitate. He slid into the back seat beside Kihara Suda, anticipation and a touch of nerves churning in his chest. As soon as we arrive at headquarters, I'll draw up a schedule. Magic assessments, combat drills, aptitude training. You'll be surprised how fast you can rise through the ranks when you know exactly what to focus on. Lucian gave a curt nod, staring out the tinted window as the city lights blurred by. His mind whirled with possibilities. Meanwhile, far across the world in the bustling hall of the Fairy Tale Guild, a completely different scene unfolded. A soft humming filled the air as a small, golden-furred cat perched on a bar stool. Under its paws, a shimmering blue magic circle pulsed to life. The cat's green eyes gleamed with determination. Transform! The word rang out, crisp and commanding. In an instant, the ethereal glyphs flared. The cat's lithe body melted away in a swirl of sparkles and light, replaced by a tall young man with sharp features and battle-ready poise. His cloak snapped around his shoulders as he solidified into human form, the very image Lucian had envisioned. The transformation complete, Lucian brushed a stray lock of hair from his eyes and surveyed the guild hall with steady confidence. As clone number 9981, he had just stepped onto a path that would take him from the Hound Force's training grounds to the heights of magical mastery. And now, standing among Fairy Tale's finest, he readied himself for whatever trials lay ahead. Lucian leaned against the tavern's polished counter, eyes fixed on the handheld mirror he'd set up. He sighed and shook his head. He'd finally managed to transform into a human, an impressive feat for someone who'd only just begun studying transformation magic, but something still wasn't right. In the reflection, he looked every inch a person, but his body was no bigger than a palm. Far from the proportions of a full-grown man, it was clear his spell still needed work. Mage, drying a clean wine glass behind the bar, offered him an encouraging smile. Honestly, this is already a huge leap. Most novices struggle just to change their ears or hands. You've pulled off a full-body shift. With a bit more practice, you'll have basic transformation mastered in no time. Lucian returned her smile with a nod. Thanks, Mira. By the way, has the guildmaster come in yet? With a soft whoosh of magic, he shrank and his features softened into the familiar shape of his cat-like form. His fur rippled from deep charcoal to silvery gray, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Until he could channel more of his power into stable human shifts, he preferred to move through town as a small, enchanted feline. It was safer and easier on his dwindling mana reserves than risking another imperfect human transformation. Chapter 8. Transformation Magic and the Mobile Castle. Transformation magic in our world is deceptively simple to learn, but fiendishly difficult to master. Apprentices can pick up its basic principles with ease, shape an arm into a bird's wing or turn your hair into vines, but achieving true mastery is another matter entirely. Legends say that at the highest level, a mage can transform into almost anything, plants, animals, even insects, calling to mind the fabled 72 transformations. Yet no matter how flawless the appearance, you only gain the form, not the powers. A mage who becomes a demon might look the part, but will never wield demon magic or strength without the proper training or innate talent. That's why the guild's latest investment, a massive enchanted mobile castle, has stirred so much excitement. Earlier today, Mira reported back to the common room. President Makarov went to talk with Arcadia Dynamics, the kingdom's leading magic device manufacturer, about outfitting the castle with transformation runes. When Fairy Tale's heroes defeated the Phantom Lord's tyrannical ruler, it was Lucian's suggestion that sealed the spoils came home, a colossal, traveling fortress capable of bearing the whole guild. It seemed like the perfect base of operations, but the cost to inscribe it with high-level transformation wards was astronomical, far beyond the guild's coffers. For now, we've anchored it in the lake beside our headquarters, where it floats like an otherworldly palace, too grand to enter and too expensive to finish. Despite the stall, morale has never been higher. Since our victory over Phantom Lord, Fairy Tale's reputation has soared across the realm. Requests for missions flood in faster than ever. Mercenary work, escorting caravans, tracking down rare monsters. Guild members lounge in the sunlit courtyard, exchanging stories of upcoming adventures, while newcomers line up at the door, eager to enlist. The mobile castle may sit idle for now, a gleaming testament to our ambitions, but within its silent halls lies the promise of greatness. Once we secure the funds and master those transformation runes, there will be no stopping us. Until then, Fairy Tale forges ahead, stronger, bolder, and ever ready for the next call to action. Since Lucian unlocked phantom teleportation, he's been racing from one disaster site to the next, mending collapsed bridges, shoring up ruined walls, and paying for every broken window out of his own pocket. Slowly but surely, the guild's treasury has recovered, swelling at last to the point where they can afford the down payment on their long-awaited mobile castle. Today, Master Makarov himself oversaw the fortress's departure to the Grand Arcane Workshop for its transformation. Lucian squinted at the guild hall, expecting the usual whirlwind of chaos, but it was unnervingly quiet. Where were Natsu and the others? They hadn't picked up any jobs lately, no fiery explosions or sudden blizzards to keep him busy. Usually by now, the place would be half in ruins, with Lucian racing around to patch the walls and mend the roof. He shook his head. If Natsu and Gray weren't here to raise hell, the hall felt almost peaceful. And for once, that was disconcerting. Lucian tucked his repair tools back into his satchel and leaned against the guildmaster's desk. He'd better find his teammates soon, or he'd have to come up with new ways to break the silence. Chapter 203, Our System and Celestial Spirit Power, Second Update. Lucian looked up from the stacks of dusty tomes he'd been poring over as Mirajane swept into the library, her eyes bright with news. "They've all gone off to Akane Resort Paradise for a vacation," she announced with a grin. "And Rocky, well, his real name is Leo, handed out vouchers for the luxury hotel there. Since you've been buried in books, I'm guessing you didn't know Rocky isn't even human?" Lucian blinked. "He's not human?" Mirajane laughed softly and perched on a nearby stool. "Nope, Rocky is actually Leo, the celestial spirit lion, the head of the zodiac. He grew so disgusted with Callan, the former celestial spirit mage, for abusing spirits and sending them to their deaths that he refused to return to the spirit world." She paused, letting that sink in. By staying behind, he prevented Callan from summoning any other spirits for her missions. That act of defiance enraged the celestial spirit king, who then barred Leo from ever going home again. Since that punishment, Leo has been living among us in human form, as a wizard in the Fairy Tale Guild, no less. Lucian ran a hand through his hair, processing the revelation. In all his library hours, he'd never suspected the quiet, easygoing Rocky was in fact one of the most powerful spirits in existence, and a rebel against his own realm to boot. Celestial spirits cannot remain in the human world forever. If they don't return to the celestial spirit world periodically to replenish their magic, their power will be completely drained, and ultimately, they will perish. Rocky was once one of the most formidable spirits, but now his strength has been utterly expended. When Celestial Mage Lucy learned of Rocky's condition, she made an extraordinary decision. She would summon the Celestial King himself and beg him to lift the seal that bound Rocky, and to make Rocky her contracted spirit. Lucian stared in astonishment. Until now, he had assumed Rocky was simply a low-ranking spirit under some other mage's command. He had never guessed that Rocky was, in fact, a celestial lord, and he'd certainly never met, or even laid eyes on, the Celestial King. All he had was a vague description in an old magical compendium, the ruler of the celestial world, so overwhelming in power and majesty that mortal minds could hardly comprehend him. Yet here was Lucy, invoking an authority no human mage had summoned in all recorded history. Lucian felt a pang of regret. "I missed the chance to see him," he muttered, "and I still have no idea what the Celestial King really looks like." Lucy's staff glowed with brilliant light as she intoned the ancient words of summoning. The air above the summoning circle trembled and brightened until it seemed to crack open. A figure wreathed in silver radiance descended, his presence so immense that the chamber itself felt as though it might buckle beneath his glory. Before Lucian's awestruck eyes, the Celestial King regarded Lucy with calm authority. With a single gesture, he dissolved the seal shackling Rocky. The once flickering spirit surged back to life, his aura blazing with renewed power. Lucy turned to her companions, her voice ringing with triumph. "Mirajane," she called. And in that moment, the impossible had become reality. No human mage had ever dared and succeeded to summon the supreme ruler of the celestial spirit world. Lucian sat at the bar, lost in thought over recent reports about the Celestial King. The lanterns overhead cast a warm glow on the polished counter, and Mirajane moved smoothly behind it, polishing glasses with a quiet confidence. Suddenly, the crystal communication orb mounted on the bar flared to life. A frail, elderly man materialized inside its surface, peering out with sharp, alert eyes. "Senator Yajima?" Mirajane whispered, setting her glass aside and lifting the orb to her ear. Surprise flickered across her face. Yajima had once been a respected fairy tale wizard and a close friend of Master Makarov. For years he'd advised the council on fairy matters, solving countless crises. The old senator's voice crackled through the orb. "There's been a hijacking at Akane Resort," he began. "Last night, a group of black wizards abducted Urza Shukaletto. Witnesses say they boarded a ship bound for a small island off Kalem's coast. Their leader is the rogue wizard Jelal. He and his followers have established what they call the R system there, apparently a device intended to resurrect Zareth, the progenitor of all black wizards. The kingdom's forces sent to stop them were annihilated. At Councillor Zekrian's urging, the council has authorized a full-scale magic spirit strike to eradicate the threat. You have 25 minutes before the assault begins. A tense silence fell as the orb's glow dimmed, leaving Lucian and Mage to digest the gravity of the situation. Make sure Makarov finds a way to rescue Urza within 25 minutes, Yajima barked, his face grim. If Urza had truly been dragged to the island, Natsu and the others would give chase. But if they didn't leave that island before the deadline, the unleashed spirit magic would consume them all. Yajima had been the lone vote against activating that power. The rest had approved it out of fear that Zareth might return. Mirajane's eyes widened. She spun to Lucian. Lucian, you're the only one who can reach Calum in time. Teleport there, find Urza and the others, and get them off the island before the magic spirit's power kicks in. The guild president might attempt a rescue, but he could never arrive in Calum within 25 minutes. Only Lucian's mastery of space magic gave them a chance. Understood, Lucian said, already summoning a spark of teleportation magic. But before I go, explain the R system and this spirit power you're worried about. In recent days, Lucian had helped Fairy Tale's mages quell magical fires across the kingdom. He'd visited almost every city, including the coastal port of Calum. Now, with time slipping away, he braced himself and leapt into the void. Lucian drew a steady breath. With his phantom ability, he could be anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye, but rushing in without knowing exactly what he'd face was suicide. He needed details. Mirajane, reading his expression, wasted no time. All right. She began, her voice steady but urgent. The threat we're up against is called the R system, an abomination of black magic devised by the very ancestor of the dark mages. Its sole purpose is to revive the dead. Centuries ago, a secret cult of black magicians built 7 of these R systems on an island off the coast of Calum, all with the goal of bringing Zareth back to life. Mirajane paused, eyes flicking to Lucian to make sure he was following her. When he nodded, she continued. The Magic Council discovered the plot and sent in forces to dismantle every one of those unfinished machines. They succeeded, but only just. Those systems were already corrupting the land with dark energy. And it gets worse. Before she joined Fairy Tale, Urza Scarlet was among the children enslaved by that cult, forced to help construct the R system's foundational structures. Lucian's fists clenched at the mention of Urza's ordeal, but Mirajane pressed on. The R system's power source is known as super time-space destruction magic. Think of it as the most devastating orb of magic conceivable, channeled through a network of orbiting magic satellites. Each satellite can lock onto any point on the globe and deliver a cataclysmic energy bomb fueled by 2.7 billion units of pure conceptual magic. In other words, it's more terrifying than a modern nuclear warhead. One well-placed strike could flatten an entire country. Silence fell between them as the weight of her words sank in. Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the glowing satellite arrays streaking across the sky, their energy missiles arcing down like shooting stars of death. Then he opened them, resolve shining through. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you, Mirajane. Give me a moment to plan. Once I know their exact location, defenses, I'll get there and shut it all down, permanently. Mirajane offered a small, weary smile. Be careful, Lucian. They'll be expecting someone with teleportation. We don't know how many guards or wards they've set up yet. Lucian nodded. I'll watch for traps, and I'll bring Urza home safely, too. With that promise hanging in the air, he closed his eyes and summoned Phantom. In the next heartbeat, he was gone, racing toward an island shrouded in shadow, armed only with knowledge, determination, and the power to turn the tide against a weapon that could destroy the world. Even a single nuclear bomb can't obliterate an entire country. Lucian understood exactly what was happening. Without hesitation, he pivoted toward the Guildhall's entrance and vanished. He'd originally planned to enlist a handful of fellow wizards for the rescue, but when he scanned the room, he realized Urza and the guild's top-tier mages had already departed. All that remained were the less experienced members, who would likely impede rather than assist. So Lucian resolved to go it alone. His mission wasn't to topple the Black Magician cabal holding Urza captive. It was simply to extract her and the others and spirit them off the island before the Council's overwhelming magical spirit energies could harm them. Once he located Urza and her comrades, he was confident the rest would be straightforward. Thanks to his apparition technique and mastery of the Mirror Realm, he could guide them safely past any lethal mana surges. Lucian hovered for only a moment above the city of Calum before unfurling his wings and diving toward the open sea. Counselor Yajima's directions had brought him here, to an island he'd never before laid eyes on. His teleportation, or apparition, as practitioners called it, worked only to places he'd visited in the past. Uncharted realms still demanded the honest labor of flight. At full stretch, however, his speed was hardly a handicap. Within minutes, a craggy islet rose from the waves, crowned by a solitary tapering tower. Scattered wreckage, splintered hulls bearing the kingdom's standard, floated near the shoreline, evidence that Lucian had found the right place. Drawing his wand, he whispered the veil of invisibility. His form shimmered out of sight, even as he wove a secondary spell, a tracking charm that painted the faint heat traces of footprints on the sand before him. He glided in silence toward the tower's iron gates. Kidnapping an S-class wizard like Urza spoke volumes about the captor's prowess, and Lucian would not underestimate his foe. Cloaked and alert, he prepared to breach the dark threshold and to welcome whatever challenges lay beyond. Chapter 204, Eat My Electromagnetic Cannon, Update 1. It's Natsu and Gray's magic. Perched above the tower gate, Lucian surveyed the scene below. Every guard lay unconscious, their bodies radiating faint residue of two very familiar magics, Natsu's Dragon Slayer flames and Gray's ice. He smiled wryly. Looks like Natsu and Gray made it here first. Lucy and Happy are probably inside too. He couldn't deny it, stung to see them arrive before him. If it had only been Urza, he could have used a simple tracking spell to locate her, phased through the walls, and been gone again before anyone noticed. As for those black mages, they'd learn their lesson soon enough once the elf magic did its work. But now Natsu and the others were holed up somewhere in the tower, and they weren't necessarily together. Tracking them down one by one would be a colossal waste of time. Lucian sighed, folding his single wing neatly behind his back. Well, I did volunteer to run for guildmaster. I can't exactly ignore my own guildmates. Shaking his head to clear his frustration, he launched himself forward and glided through the tower's shattered gate, determination blazing in his eyes. Lucian paused at the Tower of Paradise's threshold. The moment he crossed its gate, a man's voice rang out from every rune-carved sound spell lining the walls. Welcome to the Tower of Paradise. I am Jalal, its master, and the Paradise game begins now. Lucian's heart tightened. Paradise game? Tower of Paradise? He'd heard rumors of Jalal's twisted schemes, and already he could fill in the blanks. Urza was to be the living catalyst in a dark ritual destined to resurrect Zareth, the progenitor of all black mages. Once the gates of Paradise opened, Jalal would claim victory. But if Lucian and his allies could stop the ritual, they would win instead. The voice paused, then resumed with a cold laugh. Of course, this would be far too easy. I've assigned 3 S-class magicians from the Skeleton Guild to hunt you down. Only by defeating each of them can you ascend the tower and halt my plan. And one final warning, the Magic Council is already preparing a devastating counterspell, Elf Force Destruction, that could obliterate everything. You'll need to move quickly, Lucian. The enchanted speakers fell silent, leaving Lucian alone in the vast, echoing foyer. 3 deadly opponents, Urza's fate hanging in the balance, and a ticking clock before apocalyptic magic struck. It was a game with rules written in blood. He clenched his fists. So be it. He would face whatever horrors awaited, climb these spires, and save his friend, or die trying. Lucian pressed the comlink harder as Jalal's voice boomed through the tower's speakers. If you don't surrender, everyone here will be reduced to ash, erased from existence by the Elven Council's magic. Lucian's jaw clenched. That didn't make sense. How could Jalal know the Council had already activated the Elven power? He'd learned about the Senate's secret preparations only moments ago through a discreet message from Representative Ajima. And yet here, Jalal was, announcing it as though he'd been party to the decision. Could Jalal have a mole within the Senate? If so, Why launch this desperate assault now, when the Council's magic was about to be unleashed? It would be pure suicide. And there was something else nagging at Lucian's mind. After all these years shrouded in secrecy, the R system's development had never drawn so much as a whisper. Then today, in the heart of the resort, it went public in the most brazen way imaginable. It felt staged, as though someone was demanding to be exposed. Clearly, this was more than a simple attack. It reeked of conspiracy. But Lucian refused to let speculation slow him down. First things first, he muttered. I need to find her. No matter how tangled the plot, rescuing his friend was the priority. Lucian followed the trail left by his tracking spell, wings beating steadily as he closed in on Urza's last known location. He needed to find her first. If he was lucky and the team was well together, he could free them all at once. If not, he'd have to hunt them down one by one, beginning with Urza. He swept through the tower's corridors, stepping over the bodies of fallen guards until he reached the 6th floor. He froze in his tracks when a piercing scream echoed down the hall. Ah! Ah! Lucian's heart clenched. That voice belonged to Lucy. He surged forward and slipped into the central hall. There, kneeling on the cold stone floor, was Lucy of Fairy Tale, her blouse shredded beyond recognition. She pressed her arms across her chest, desperately trying to keep herself covered. Standing over her was Juvia, one of Zengjin's notorious 4 ghost element mages, twirling a whip made of pure water and lashing it savagely across Lucy's bare skin. Behind Juvia, a punk-styled mage pounded out a frenzied riff on a magical guitar, each chord rippling through the air like a physical blow. Lucian's blood ran cold. The chaotic notes, the merciless whip, Lucy's anguished cries, it all reeked of mind control magic. As a psychic, he felt spiritual energies like a thunderbolt, and this one crackled with the strongest psychic aura he'd ever sensed. Determination flared in his chest. He had to act, and fast, before Lucy and the rest of his friends were lost to that dark spell forever. Lucian watched in growing alarm as the guitar-playing wizard wove a hypnotic melody, the notes twisting through the air like invisible shackles. Under that sound magic, Juvia's eyes glazed over, and she lurched toward Lucy Hartfilia, weapon raised. This had to be one of the 3 S-class magicians Jalal warned them about. His power was unmistakable. Careful not to confront such strength head-on, Lucian slipped a plain copper coin from his cloak. Juvia herself was an S-class mage, but now she was no more than a puppet. In the Tower of Paradise, even fellow S-class opponents could be lethal if approached blindly. With a soft whisper of incantation, Lucian activated his invisibility and prepared a surprise strike. Try this, my electromagnetic gun. He flipped the coin into the air. Immediately, it crackled with 200 million volts of electric potential. With a flick of his cat-enhanced paw, the spinning copper disc transformed into a supersonic electromagnetic projectile. It streaked across the hall, crackling with raw energy, aimed squarely at the guitarist's head. Mid-riff in his haunting refrain, the wizard's fingers froze on the strings. His eyes flew wide as the sudden blast of electricity tore toward him. What? Lucian barely had time to react when the supersonic electromagnetic cannon fired. He couldn't cry out to Juvia for a water barrier, so he did the only thing he could. Clutching a lock of his own hair, he focused his unique hair magic into a shimmering shield rolled out before him. Boom! The beam slammed into the living barrier, crackling with raw power. For an instant it stalled, then ripped through the hair and hurtled onward, striking the guitar wizard squarely between the brows. With a pained howl, the wizard flew back, crashing into the stone wall behind him. Massive chunks of masonry tumbled down, and his sound magic shattered. At that same moment, the spell controlling Juvia snapped, freeing the S-class wizard from its grip. Juvia shook her head, her cerulean eyes clearing. She rushed to Lucian's side, grasping his arms. Lucian, I'm so sorry. I couldn't hold the control. Are you all right? Lucian gave her a wry smile and sat up. Aside from shock and a few grazes, he was fine. Nearby, the guitar wizard staggered to his feet, one hand pressed against a swelling bump on his forehead. Despicable, he spat, blood mingling with fury. Hiding in the shadows to strike. His gaze flicked down to the severed tufts of hair clutched in Lucian's other hand. Rage distorted his features. My beautiful hair, he screeched. It's gone, like a dog chewed it off. You'll pay for this, Lucian. He charged forward, eyes blazing with murderous intent. Lucian straightened, determination as fierce as any blade in there. His stance. The battle was only just beginning. Lucian hefted his guitar and drew a steady breath. He was poised to unleash his ultimate technique, a beguiling melody woven into a commanding chant that would bend every sorcerer in the hall to his will. His latest attacker still lurked somewhere in hiding, unseen and unheard. But the instant Lucian's first note rang out, none who heard its resonance could escape his control. Chapter 205, The Overlord's Hair Loss Curse, Second Update. Before the guitar wizard could spring his hand free, a streak of red light slammed into him from behind. "Expelliarmus!" Lucian shouted. Moments earlier, he'd circled wide after firing his electromagnetic gun. Now the disarming spell hit its mark, wrenching the enchanted guitar from the wizard's grasp. The instrument clattered to the ground. Surprised? Didn't see that coming, did you? Furious, the guitar wizard recovered instantly. He raised both arms and wove his signature hair magic. Ebony strands whipped out, elongating by the second and cascading toward Lucian like a razor-sharp waterfall. The wizard hissed through gritted teeth, "Get out of my way!" Lucian met the onrush without flinching. He leveled his wand at the tangle of flying hair and intoned clearly, "Calvitio Dominus." In an instant, every strand withered and fell away, dissolving into dust before it could strike. The Overlord's hair loss curse, Lucian's personal specialty, was as devastating as it was humiliating, on par with other infamous jinxes like the dancing hex, the squeaky nest curse, and the snot siphon hex. The guitar wizard staggered, steam rising from his scalp as bald patches spread in seconds. He staggered back, shock and rage warring in his eyes. Lucian advanced, wand still steady. "How do you like that?" he said quietly. "Never underestimate the power of a well-placed curse." As the wizard scrambled to recover his composure, and whatever remained of his hair, Lucian prepared for the next move. In a duel of magical extremes, the balance of power had just shifted dramatically. Lucian surveyed his foes with cold amusement. The curses he'd prepared were little more than harmless parlor tricks, but exactly right for his purpose. He gathered magical energy, murmured the words of the hair loss hex, and sent it streaking toward the guitar wizard. The wizard's untamed locks froze mid-flight, then slithered down in a lifeless curtain around his shoulders. With a strangled cry, he clawed at his head, once crowned by a glossy mane, now gleaming smooth and bare. "My hair? What kind of cruel sorcery is this?" he wailed, collapsing to his knees. Before the stunned musician could gather himself, Lucian wove a second spell. A crackling bolt of electricity leapt from his fingertips, forth ensnaring the wizard in a cocoon of high-voltage energy. In an instant, the man's body stiffened, turning to stone where he stood. Lucian allowed himself a satisfied nod. With a few precise gestures, he undid the wizard's own control magic and then, deftly, lifted the statue into a lacquered box. He sealed it with runes, tested its weight, and with a flick of his wrist sent it sailing into the dressing room. He paused only a moment to tuck away the last of his disguises. Puppet-like foes animated by music, this was a magic unlike any he'd encountered in the fairy tale archives. He made a mental note to study it later. At that moment, the tent flap rustled and Lucy burst inside, her eyes wide with relief. "Lucian, you made it." She let out a long breath, the tension draining from her shoulders. Thank goodness. Lucian had just finished sealing away the last remnants of the Ghost Dominator's dark magic when the rest of Fairy Tale's wizards, Lucy included, let out a collective sigh of relief. Knowing Lucy's clothes had been shredded in the fight, he waved his hand and cast a repair spell. In an instant, her tattered skirt and blouse knitted back together, better than new. Lucy smoothed her skirt, but couldn't keep the worry from her voice. "Lucian, where are Urza and the others? What happened?" His face darkened. Urza was sealed into a spirit card by her former partner, and now she's missing. Lucy hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder, where a faint bruise marked her skin from Juvia's water whip attack. She took a steadying breath and ran through the events of the past few days. They'd arrived on this island resort thanks to a hotel voucher Rocky had handed them. The beach was peaceful, and even Juvia Loxer, one of the four elements of the old Ghost Dominion, seemed content to relax. But last night, a squad of rogue mages struck without warning. Their magic was unlike anything Fairy Tale had ever faced. It hit them all before they knew what was happening. In the chaos, Urza and Hobby were kidnapped. Before dawn, Urza and Hobby had broken free of their bindings and followed their captors to the cliffside tower. Lucy and the others fought through the outer guards and stormed the entrance, determined to rescue their friends. Inside the gloomy corridors, they found Urza, exhausted but alive. It was then they learned the cruel truth. Urza had once been a slave forced to build this very tower for her captors. Now, those same stones threatened to imprison her forever. Lucian and Jalal stood side by side atop the shattered ruins of the Black Wizard's fortress, dust settling around them as their friends cheered. Together, they had overthrown the dark enchanter who had enslaved them all. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare was over. But as the cheers died down and the group began to turn toward freedom, Jalal's eyes gleamed with an unfamiliar coldness. Without warning, Jalal's voice rang out through the clearing. "If any of you value your lives, you will expel Lucian at once," he commanded, his tone unyielding. Shock rippled through their ranks as he accused Lucian of betrayal, claiming the young man had been in league with the Black Wizard all along. Before anyone could question him, Jalal spun a web of lies so convincing that even Lucian's closest comrades hesitated. Under Jalal's spell, they were convinced that building more towers so they could complete his so-called Land of Freedom was their only hope. That night, a new assault came from the shadows. The attackers were none other than Lucian's old companions from his days in bondage, magicians who had served under the Black Wizard. Their real purpose wasn't to kill Lucian, but to drag him back to the island, where he might finally see Jalal's true intent. Only when the group learned the truth did one friend, Shu, intervene. Fearing for Lucian's safety, Shu seized him in an unguarded moment and sealed him inside his enchanted playing card. Jalal's forces watched, powerless to break the seal. Now divided, the allies scattered. Quinn slipped away with the sealed card, determined to reach the tower's summit and confront Jalal alone. Hot on their heels were Gray and Simon, another of Lucian's childhood friends, who refused to let Quinn face the dark wizard without backup. Below, Lucy and Juvia darted through the labyrinthine corridors, calling out for anyone who had rushed into the citadel's depths. And somewhere within the fortress, a desperate plan was unfolding to rescue Natsu from Happy's reluctant custody. As the moon climbed higher over the island, every friendship, every alliance was being tested. Loyalties would be revealed, and only by unraveling Jalal's deception could they hope to reunite and survive what came next. "Let's find Natsu first, then meet up with Urza and the others before we get out of here." Lucian had originally planned to teleport Lucy and Juvia to safety immediately. But with two S-class mages still roaming the Tower of Paradise, and Jalal's power uncertain, he decided it made more sense to stick together. After all, Jalal had already spotted him when he defeated the Guitar Wizard. The more allies he had, the better their chances of slipping past any other threats. Juvia's own S-class water magic could turn the tide in a pinch, and even Lucy's celestial spirit, Aquarius, was no lightweight. Her strength rivaled that of an average S-class mage, despite her hot-headed nature. Lucy only dared summon her in life-or-death situations. Footprints detected. Natsu. With that, Lucian refocused his tracking spell on Natsu's trail and led Lucy and Juvia deeper into the tower. The vast structure stretched nearly 100 meters into the sky, its dozens of floors promising more dangers, and they hoped, their missing friend. The interior of the tower is a labyrinth. Without the tracking spell, we'd never find anyone in here. I've already lost their trail, and now Fairy Tale's healer has arrived too. Things are getting interesting. High atop the tower, Jalal lounges on his throne, chin resting on one hand. He flicks a tiny chess piece, his pawn for the Guitar Wizard, off the board and lets it clatter to the floor. The fight raging below barely registers for him. As a thought projection empowered with half his true strength, enough to earn him a seat among the kingdom's 10 holy wizards, Jalal is certain he could crush every last Fairy Tale mage without breaking a sweat. Even if an S-class feline warrior joined the fray, the outcome would be unchanged. He simply finds direct action dull. To pass the time until the spirit magic's power finally descends and fully activates his R system, he's been toying with this mock battle. But 15 minutes still remain, and that, he decides, is far too long. Meanwhile, Lucian bursts from the winding corridors below, Lucy in one arm and Juvia in the other. With a single powerful motion, he takes to the air, rocketing straight toward the tower's summit. There isn't a moment to lose. Lucian pinpointed the exact floor where Natsu was hiding, then invoked his explosion spell to blow a jagged breach through the tower's wall. He vaulted inside, eyes narrowing. "What in the world?" he muttered. Before him stood a startling creature, a powerful, human-like body topped with the head of a great horned owl. But most uncanny was its plumage, a short, tousled crest of cherry-red feathers that matched Natsu's hair almost perfectly. Lucian's heart skipped. His tracking rune, calibrated specifically to Natsu's unique life energy, pulsed with bright urgency on the creature's chest. Somehow, his quarry had led him straight to this impossible owl being. Chapter 206, Urza's Pure Heart Garb, Fire Dragon's Roar. A searing torrent of crimson flame blasted from the owl-masked figure, charring the ground and sending up plumes of smoke. Gray leapt backward, narrowly evading the inferno, then slammed his arms forward and summoned Ice Make Assault Gun. A glittering ice cannon rose from the frozen earth and discharged in perfect counterpoint, hurling shards of frost into the heart of the blaze. The two forces collided in a thunderous explosion of steam and debris. Nearby, Urza's childhood friends, Simon and the Exceed, Happy, lay battered and gasping for breath. Lucian knelt beside them, dread knotting his stomach. "Simon, what happened here? Weren't you supposed to be trailing Shiomara and Urza? And Happy, where's Natsu?" Simon managed a pained groan, clutching his side as he forced himself upright on one knee. Happy's whiskers trembled, tears sparkled in his round eyes. Lucian's gaze whipped back to the owl-headed mage. Dragon Slayer flames, only Natsu wielded that power, and that single lock of rose-pink hair, identical to Natsu's, yet the owl's head made no sense. Before Lucian could speak, Happy sobbed. "Lucian, it's horrible. Natsu was eaten by that owl." Simon pressed a trembling hand to his mouth, swallowing back pain. "He's not Natsu. He's the S-Mage owl, one of the 3 feathers of the Skull and Bones Guild." Lucian's blood ran cold. The Skull and Bones Guild's 3 feathers were legendary for their ruthlessness, and this one had just decimated Natsu, the Dragon Slayer. He rose to his feet with grim determination. "We'll get him back," Lucian vowed, "no matter what it takes." Storm clouds gathered overhead as the battle for Natsu's fate, and perhaps all of Fairy Tale, was only beginning. Lucian's heart pounded as Owlman laughed, pacing before them with cruel satisfaction. "I possess the terrifying ability to steal an enemy's magic by consuming it in my stomach," he announced. "In 10 minutes, the Fire Dragon Slayer Natsu will be fully digested, and I will command the power of dragon-slaying magic." With a vicious grin, Owlman unleashed a torrent of searing flames that pinned Gray to the rocky floor. Lucian darted forward, ready to intervene, but before he could reach him, Juvia sprang into action. Her eyes blazed with determination as she summoned a flurry of razor-sharp water blades. "Gray, hold on! I've got you!" Juvia cried, sending the liquid sword slicing through the fire. Each blade could cleave stone in half, and Owlman twisted aside just in time, narrowly avoiding being torn apart. "Good work, Juvia." Gray wasted no time. He drew in a frosty breath, frost crystals forming at his fingertips. "Ice style, ice cannon." A thunderous roar echoed through the chamber as a towering barrage of ice shot straight at Owlman. The blast hit like an avalanche, shattering walls and hurling him into a heap of rubble. In that very instant, the magic he had devoured turned against him. With a sickening retch, he expelled Natsu, who burst free from his stomach in a blast of roaring fire. Lucian rushed to Natsu's side as the Dragon Slayer collapsed, coughing flames. Beside him, Gray and Juvia stood ready, their faces flushed with victory. According to the Guild's records, Gray's power rivaled that of any S-class mage, and today he had just proven it. Lucian studied the raw force of the ice and snow cannon and allowed himself a small, approving nod. Channeling frost magic at that scale took real talent, and 2 S-class mages who'd fused ice and water could unleash devastation few could withstand. "Ice magic has to go on my list," he murmured to himself. Back at the Marvel Workshop, he'd just finished forging a new wand from the heart nerve fibers of the World Tree and the Frost Giant King. It already boasted the standard 25-fold magical amplification and a special bonus for frost spells. If he could learn this ice and snow cannon and cast it through that wand, the resulting blast would rival an avalanche. He checked his pocket watch. Celestial Spirit Mage, C goes live in 10 minutes, he announced. Lucy, you and Simon escort Urza's friends out of the tower, get them to the shore outside the island, and wait for us there. Happy, find Natsu and come with me. We're going after Urza. Natsu was only mildly shaken by the owl's attack, nothing Lucian couldn't patch up quickly. Simon, however, was still bleeding from a wing wound. He'd be of little use in a fight. Better to have him regroup with the others. And since Lucy's bond with Aquarius was strongest at sea, she was the perfect choice to stand watch offshore. With everyone dispatched, Lucian turned back toward the looming tower. Time to put his new wand and his frost magic to the ultimate test. Lucian gathered Natsu, Gray, and Juvia, each an S-class mage, to join the search for Urza. With so many top-tier fighters at his side, any obstacle ahead would be dealt with in an instant. Stay sharp, he warned. Lucy knelt beside the injured Simon, supporting him as they moved toward the tower's entrance. Above them, Happy swooped in and scooped up Natsu. Lucian lifted Gray and Juvia. The Exceed flapped his wings, and they all shot into the sky, following the faint pulse of Lucian's tracking spell. Minutes later, they hovered before a level just beneath the tower's summit. This is it, Lucian murmured. He twined his wand around his tail, took careful aim at the tower's magically reinforced wall, and shouted, "Thunderbolt explosion!" A deafening crack echoed through the air as a massive hole tore open where the blast struck. The tower, 8 years in construction, comprised of rare magic-enhanced stone and inscribed with powerful runic wards, had shrugged off every ordinary spell thrown at it. Yet Lucian's thunderbolt explosion, amplified through his specially attuned wand, carried a built-in anti-structure effect. The result, the wall fractured like glass, leaving a wide breach that led deeper into the tower's heart. Wow! Lucian, Natsu, and Gray couldn't hide their amazement as they stepped into the cavernous chamber. This level of the Tower of Paradise consisted of little more than a vast emptiness bisected by a single, swaying bridge. Beyond it lay the gateway to the final floor. Guarding that bridge was Ikaruga, the 3-feathered crow's strongest costume mage, dressed in a cherry blossom kimono and brandishing a blood-red magic sword. Yet their exclamations weren't for the cavern's sheer scale or Ikaruga's striking appearance. Opposite the Guardian stood Urza Scarlet in purgatory armor, her form tense as Ikaruga's blade bit into her flank. In a flash of steel and magic, Urza's armor shattered, shards glinting in midair. Before anyone could react, she'd shed the broken plating and reappeared in a simple chest wrap, twin longswords dancing in her hands. "Urza, need backup?" Lucian called, sprinting forward with Natsu and Gray at his side. Together they hurled an explosive spell that cracked Ikaruga's magic-forged armor, no small feat against an S-class mage. Urza glanced over her shoulder, a fierce smile on her lips. "Thanks, but I've got this," she said, pivoting to meet Ikaruga head-on. With a roar, the two women clashed in a spectacle of steel and sorcery, their swords carving arcs of light through the darkness. Lucian and the others fell back, giving Urza room to fight. Across the chasm, the bridge quivered beneath Ikaruga's feet, but neither warrior faltered. Sparks flew as red steel met silver, and a tense hush fell on the chamber. Every onlooker knew they'd witnessed the opening moves of a battle that could decide their fate atop the Tower of Paradise. Urza's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she faced Banju, a swordswoman of undeniable skill. She knew she couldn't afford to guard against every feint. Only an all-out assault could break her opponent's defense. Clenching her teeth, she poured every ounce of magic into her twin swords and sprang forward. Banju met her with equal resolve, blade against blade. For a heartbeat they hovered in midair, swords locked. In reality, hundreds of exchanges flashed between them, slashes, parries, ripostes, each strike more ferocious than the last. Finally, both feet hit the ground, and Banju's breath caught. "You've changed, Fairy Queen," Banju panted as her enchanted blade splintered to pieces. She crumpled without another sound. Urza stood over her, breathing hard. Before she could sheath her swords, Lucian hurried up to her side. "Urza, Banju's subdued, but there's only 8 minutes before the spirit magic detonates. We have to evacuate now." Urza shook her head firmly. "No, Lucian, you're taking everyone else away. I have to confront Jalal myself." She stared past Lucian, her violet eyes blazing with purpose. He was once so kind, so reliable. Why has he turned against us? I need answers, and if I can stop him in the next 8 minutes, every part of his plan will collapse. Despite the danger, Urza set her jaw and slipped her broken swords aside. She would face Jalal, no matter the cost, and discover the reason behind his betrayal. Lucian met Urza's unwavering stare and knew there was no talking her out of this. She was determined to stay and die with Jalal. He shot a quick glance at Natsu and the others, holding up a hand to silence any protest. Then, the moment Urza turned her back, he unleashed a swift, silent magic spell. Urza's knees buckled. Her eyes fluttered once, and then she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Chapter 207, Magic Crystal that Enhances Meditation Efficiency, Second Update. Urza isn't a dragon slayer. She doesn't share Natsu or Gajil's innate magic immunity. Caught entirely off guard, she collapsed the instant Lucian's coma spell struck her. Juvia, get Urza out of here, Lucian ordered, urgency sharpening his voice. We have 5 minutes before they unleash the spirit magic assault. Facing Jalal now would be suicide. He commands S-rank mages at will, powerhouses on par with Banju, and rumors whisper he might even be saint level. More troubling still, the entire operation reeks of a grand conspiracy. With no clear view of their enemy's plan and the looming threat of spirit magic, it would be madness to play into Jalal's hands. First priority, exit the Paradise Tower and put as much distance between us and that attack as possible, Lucian continued, rallying the group. Once we're safe, we regroup and figure out our next move. If spirit magic levels the tower and takes Jalal with it, all the better. If they survive, we'll decide then. Fight if we can win, run if we can't. Within moments, Juvia had Urza cradled over her shoulder, and the small party melted into the twisting corridors of the tower. Lucian's heart pounded as they raced against the clock, every step a gamble between confrontation and survival, each second drawing them closer to either triumph or disaster. Lucian surveyed the dark horizon, weighing their chances. The kingdom teemed with magic guilds, dozens of formidable wizards, and the 10 holy paladins. If things went south, help would come, but there was no need for needless sacrifice. Lucian refused to risk an unwinnable fight. If Jalal intended to use Urza's body as a vessel for Zeref's resurrection, he'd inevitably abandon the Tower of Paradise to chase them. Better to confront him at sea than be cornered within those impenetrable walls. Out here, Jalal would lose his home field advantage, and the magic elves who defended the tower couldn't follow them. With a flick of his wrist, Lucian summoned the enchanted chest expanded by his traceless extension spell. He carefully placed Urza and her 2 unconscious companions inside. The chest vanished in a silvery flash and reappeared on the open water just beyond the island. A small, battered boat drifted nearby. On board stood Lucy and Simon, flanked by Wooly and Miliana, Urza's other childhood friends. They'd slipped away from the tower under cover of night. Lucian raised his hand. Repair, as before. Golden runes flared around the shattered King's Navy vessel moored at the dock. Splintered wood mended itself, torn sails reknotted, and warped iron hinges straightened. Within moments, the ship gleamed as if it had just been launched. Lucian opened the chest. He murmured the dispelling chant, and Urza's eyelids fluttered open. One by one, she and her 2 allies climbed onto the deck. Lucy, Simon, Wooly, and Miliana joined them, shaking out damp clothing and catching their breath. Side by side, the 7 friends stared back at the Tower of Paradise, its twin spires cutting through the moonlit sky. The battle for Urza's soul and the fate of Zeref would begin here, but for now, they had the sea at their backs and hope on their side. Urza, there's less than a minute before the spirit magic cannon fires. Let's watch from here. Jalal, Urza, newly awakened, knew there was no way she could reach the summit in time. All she could do was let out a resigned sigh. Across the chamber, Jalal swept the remaining chess pieces off the table, rose, and stepped up to the broad window overlooking the Tower of Paradise. Never mind, he muttered. I'll deal with you once the tower is finished. Completing the R system demanded an astronomical reservoir of magical energy, more than even a Saint 10 could muster on his own. His only recourse was the Council's ultimate weapon, the spirit magic cannon. Years ago, Jalal had split his power to forge a thought avatar, infiltrating the Council under the alias Zikling. wielding the strength of Saint. 10. He secured a seat among its members. It was this avatar who proposed using the canon's 2.7 billion units of conceptual magic to fuel the Tower of Paradise, not merely to prevent Zeref's resurrection, as publicly claimed, but to channel that tremendous energy straight into the tower's completion. Lucian watched the shifting tides of magic from the deck of the ship, a grim smile curving his lips. With Urza's S-class vessel in his grasp, the only thing left was to finish the R system. Once it was fully online, he would reclaim his scattered consciousness from the Council's vault, restore his true power, and then personally drag Urza back for Zeref's resurrection. His original plan had hinged on waiting for her to come to him. Now, with the R system almost complete, that delay no longer mattered. Below them, Paradise Tower quivered under the weight of raw, arcane energy. Suddenly, overhead, multiple concentric circles of golden glyphs rippled into being, each one vast enough to blot out the sky. Lucian and everyone aboard the ship froze in awe and terror. They had all heard rumors of the Council's ultimate destructive magic. Legends spoke of its sheer conceptual force. But this was the first time any of them had seen it manifested. The air thrummed as those glyphs drew upon 2.7 billion units of pure mana. Boom! A lance of molten gold shot downward from the largest magic circle and slammed into Paradise Tower's pinnacle. The impact unleashed a blinding white flare that engulfed the horizon. Every eye closed, every breath caught, as the world seemed to shatter in 1,000 shimmering shards of light. When the brilliance finally subsided, the ship's crew dared not look. None wanted to see the ruin the Council's power had wrought. And high above, Lucian's eyes gleamed with cold triumph. His moment was nearly at hand. Lucian stared in disbelief. How could this happen? When the blinding white light faded, the Paradise Tower hadn't vanished. It had transformed into a colossal magic crystal over 100 meters tall, pulsing with raw mana. Lucian's heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. Jalal hadn't pursued him, nor had he fled the tower's interior when the magic spirit power was unleashed. If the Council's attack had succeeded, Jalal would have tried to escape. The fact that he stayed behind told Lucian everything he needed to know. Jalal must have neutralized the assault somehow. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been foolish enough to await certain death at the tower's core. So this was Jalal's secret. The Paradise Tower Lucian had seen before was nothing but a skeletal frame, an incomplete structure. Its true form would only emerge once it absorbed the unleashed spirit power. Only then would it solidify into the massive crystal spire before them. Urza took a sharp breath beside him. She'd been one of the forced laborers who helped build the original Paradise Tower years ago, and she understood its true purpose. 8 years earlier, the Black Mage group had erected 8 identical towers at once, channeling ley line energy into each to activate what they called the R system. But Jalal had constructed just this one. No R system could ever be fully operative with only a single tower. Or so she'd believed, until now. As they watched the crystal tower hum with accumulating power, Urza realized the truth. Jalal hadn't failed to build the other 7 towers. He'd planned for them all to spring into existence only after the spirit power was released. In a single, spectacular moment, he could complete the entire network. And once that network went online, not even the Magic Council could stand in his way. Urza's breath caught as she gazed up at the crystalline spire. Until this moment, she'd been locked in a single-minded quest to reach Jalal on the top floor and end his scheme. But now, standing before the magic crystal tower, everything fell into place. "So this is it," she murmured, tapping the tower's surface. "With this structure, Jalal has completed the R system." A hush swept over the others as Urza's words sank in. Natsu was the first to break the silence. "The R system? You mean he's using that giant crystal to meditate, supercharging his magic level?" Urza nodded grimly. "Exactly. The tower isn't just a fortress. It's a colossal mana condenser. It pulls in ambient ether and focuses it into Jalal's core through the R system." Lucian stepped closer, mesmerized by the tower's pulsing glow. His mind raced back to his days as an apprentice mage, when he'd learned how to draw external energy into his consciousness, convert it into pure mana, and store it within his body. Techniques not unlike the cultivation practices of mythic sages. He closed his eyes, recalling every detail. And with artifacts like the Ring of Merlin or the Ring of Morgana, he said, voice low with excitement, he can compress that ether even further. The denser the mana, the faster his cultivation. At this rate, breaking past level 500 and achieving virtual immortality becomes all but guaranteed. Urza's gaze hardened. That's his real goal. He's not just planning to overpower us, he's ascending to a plane of power no one can challenge. Around them, the magic crystal tower throbbed with latent might. The truth of Jalal's design had been laid bare, and the gravity of their mission had never been clearer. Lucian knew that meditating with Morgana's ring inside the magic crystal tower could boost his power tenfold. Resolute, he vowed to defeat Jalal today and claim the tower for himself. Fortunately, his allies were equally formidable. Alongside Lucian stood the S-Class powerhouse Urza, the fiery S-Class mage Natsu, the ice-cunning Grey, Juvia's water magic, and Lucy, whose S-Class celestial spirits would prove invaluable in a battle on the open sea. Chapter 208, True Celestial Magic, Update 1. Urza, my once beloved, lay down your body for the sake of my ideals. Jalal's voice thundered from above the ship. Silhouetted against the night sky, he hovered effortlessly over the deck. Without hesitation, Urza summoned twin swords of shimmering magic and vaulted into the air. Jalal, you filthy traitor, stand down. Lucian's brow tightened. He'd known this Jalal was powerful, but he hadn't expected him to outclass Josei, whom they'd only beaten last time by pooling every guild wizard's strength and relying on Natsu's Fire Eater magic to drain Josei's reserves. That power, it's stronger than Josei's. Undoubtedly Saint Grade 10 level. Everyone, move out. Lucian spread his crimson wings and soared upward, Natsu, Grey, and Juvia on his heels. Below them, Simon and the others lay wounded, unable to join the fray. On the deck, Lucy clenched the Aquarius Star Spirit key in her hand. Is it only you two? Zaref's lips curled into a sneer. In the span of a heartbeat, he vanished into thin air. Lucian watched as Jalal, wreathed in starlight, moved with a speed so great it seemed he might tear a hole in the air. First, Jalal sidestepped Urza's deadliest sword technique, the infamous Kakaju slash, then sent Natsu and Grey sprawling with a series of lightning-fast kicks. Before Lucian could catch his breath, Jalal had already locked onto Juvia. The water mage's form rippled and dispersed just in time, droplets scattering around her like mist. Seizing the moment, Jalal shouted, 7-star sword! 7 glowing blades materialized in midair, crackling with thunder, and drove straight through the water shield. Juvia screamed as the magic attack hurled her into the sea. Lucian let the scene fuel his determination. Super railgun, he roared, channeling electromagnetic energy through a single coin. In an instant, it tore toward Jalal's back in a blaze of electric light. Jalal barely flinched. That won't touch me, he said coolly. Spinning on his heel, he drew back a fist cloaked in starlight and punched the oncoming coin into oblivion. No more than a moment later, he dissolved into a streak of radiant speed, hurtling straight for Lucian. A 4th-level electromagnetic cannon won't slow down a Saint-level 10 wizard, Jalal called over the roar of wind. Lucian clenched his teeth. Had this been Misaka Makoto's triple supersonic railgun, he knew Jalal wouldn't have dared to meet it head-on. But this was Lucian's show, and he wasn't about to back down. Change! In a flash of golden light, Lucian's tiny kitten form exploded into a massive feline, 10 meters of rippling muscles crackling with raw power. He reared back on his hind legs and snarled, Electric surge! 200 million volts of pure energy coursed through him, igniting every muscle fiber, boosting his strength and speed beyond mortal limits. Stay back! With a thunderous swipe, his millstone-sized claws met Jalal's lightning-fast charge. The impact reverberated through the arena as the Saint-level 10 wizard was sent skidding across the stone floor. Now! Lucian pivoted and unleashed his razor-sharp energy blades, pinning Jalal against the ground in a deadly vice. He couldn't afford mercy. Against a foe of this caliber, only an all-out assault would secure victory. Open, Gate of Aquarius, Aqua. Far below on the churning sea, Lucy plunged her golden star key into the water. The waves roiled ominously in response, heralding the next stage of the battle. A shimmering blue magic circle erupted into being as Aqua, the mermaid, gripped her enchanted bottle. Azure veins stood out on her arms as she bellowed, You insolent wretch! You've spoiled my date for the last time. Begone! With power on par with any S-class mage, she shattered the air. The water trapped inside her flask roared to life, drawing in the surrounding sea until a titanic tsunami surged toward Jelal. Ah! The wave didn't stop at Jalal's position. It slammed into the hull of the great ship, sending Natsu, Gray, Juvia, and Lucy Tum ling into the frothing water. It was a merciless, wide-ranging assault. Urza leapt forward. "Giant armor! Spear of Evil's Bane!" she cried. In a flash, she donned her most formidable armor and launched a spear said to shatter all manner of wickedness at the submerged target. Caught between Aqua's tsunami and Urza's spear, Jalal nonetheless stood calm. Folding his arms, he called forth a black magic glyph that pulsed with ominous energy. Descend into endless night, dark paradise. In an instant, a yawning void of pure darkness tore open before them, as though ready to swallow the very world. A roaring shockwave swept across the bay as the black hole collapsed in on itself, swallowing countless razor-sharp blades, surging seawater, and even the giant tridents hurled at it, before erupting in a blinding explosion. The force slammed Lucian, Urza, Aqua, Lucy, and the others backward like rag dolls. "Ice shape! Great platform!" Gray shouted. Beneath the churning water, glowing white sigils flared to life. In an instant, a vast sheet of ice spread across the waves, arresting everyone's fall. Lucian hit the slick surface and slid to a halt, heart hammering. "So damn strong," he muttered, pushing himself upright. Dozens of S-class wizards had unleashed their most powerful magics at him, and he'd countered them all with a single devastating spell. He was even fiercer than Joseph had been the last time they fought. From the frosted platform, a low, mocking voice drifted across the water. "Let me share a little secret, one that'll crush your hopes. Joseph, your guild's president, the one who fell before all of you? In the Holy 10 rankings, he wasn't even as powerful as one facet of my own mind." Lucian stiffened as the speaker continued. "And just so you know why the council tapped into a spirit's magic in the first place, it was because I split off a fragment of my consciousness and named it Zickline. Surely you've heard of it?" "Zickline!" Lucian's blood ran cold. His pupils narrowed as he stared out over the ice, readying himself for whatever horror lay ahead. Lucian recognized the name at once. Jelal, youngest of the legendary 10 sanctified mages and a sitting member of the Mage Council. Yet no one had ever seen his face. No photograph had ever been leaked. Facing him now, Lucian was even more stunned to discover that this was merely a thought projection. Thought magic was the apex of arcane art, restricted to top-tier S-class archmages. Mastering it took decades of relentless training. Once summoned, a thought duplicate was a fully real clone, capable of wielding up to half the original caster's power and recallable across any distance. Even at half strength, such a doppelganger would outclass Archmage Joseph. With Jalal at his peak, the true scope of his might was unfathomable. Jalal stood there, arms folded, exuding supreme confidence as he began his inevitable monologue. "Never forget," he declared, voice echoing with power, "that strength only grows through adversity." While the pseudo-villain reveled in his own rhetoric, Lucian acted. He pressed his mind into Natsu's, summoning him silently to his side, then unleashed a concentrated stream of fiery fire into his friend's open mouth. The recent battle against the specters had already sharpened their abilities, but Natsu, sustained by this intense infusion, seemed to unlock something entirely new. Where once his body strained under the raw heat, now it glowed with a radiant resilience, ready for whatever came next. Lucian crouched behind a shattered pillar, his pulse racing as he watched Jalal ascend atop a glowing celestial magic circle. Ripples of raw arcane energy warped the air around him, and his laughter rang out like thunder. "All right," Jalal called down. "You asked for a demonstration of the gap in our power? Prepare yourself." He thrust both hands skyward. True celestial magic, star collapse. A colossal glyph blazed into existence above his head, then fractured the clouds. From that rift in the heavens hurtled a mammoth meteor, its surface engulfed in roaring flames. Lucian's blood ran cold as he realized the sheer force of that falling star. One strike from it could turn an entire city to ash. Chapter 209, The Thunder Giant Absorbing Thunderstorms, Second Update. It really is celestial magic. Lucian stared up at the colossal meteorite plummeting from the sky, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Everyone over here." He knew that even their combined defenses couldn't stop a strike of that magnitude, so instead of trying to block it, he planned to dodge it. Lucian sent out a brief mental summons, and in moments, Lucy, Natsu, Gray, and the others had gathered at his side. "Natsu, unleash your brilliant flame," Lucian ordered. Natsu's hands ignited, one blazing with crimson heat, the other with amber fire. He pressed them together, fusing the two infernos into the awe-inspiring dragon's brilliant flame. The searing torrent of fire roared upward, hammering the meteorite from below. Seizing the opportunity, Lucian swept his arm in a graceful arc. Mirror world! The hard ice beneath their feet rippled like liquid glass. In an instant, they were transported into a mirrored dimension, everything around them reversed in ghostly reflection. "What's happening?" Lucy whispered, her breath misting in the chill air. Outside the mirrored barrier, the meteorite exploded into a storm of jagged fragments, each shard striking with the force of a tidal wave. But inside the mirror world, the shockwave only brushed the surface of the ice, dissipating harmlessly around them. Lucian and his friends stood completely unscathed, safe within their reflective sanctuary. Lucy and the others stared in confusion. "This is my mirror magic," Lucian said, sweeping a hand over the broken mirror shards at their feet. "It lets me slip into a parallel mirror realm, completely shielding us from the outside world." Hugh raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that just another form of space magic? Very similar to mine." Shio nodded. "My power traps enemies in a pocket dimension inside my playing cards. It's like a miniature world, much smaller than Lucian's mirror realm, but the idea is the same. If anyone can pinpoint our location, it's Jalal. He's mastered countless magics and can sense even the slightest spatial disturbance." Simon peered through the fractured mirror surface, his face tightening at the sight of the raging tsunami beyond. "We need to get out of here. There's no way we can take Jalal head-on. If Jalal succeeds in resurrecting Zareth, it will be a catastrophe for the entire world," Urza countered, her voice cold and determined. She turned to Lucian. "Send everyone else away. I'll stay behind, wait for an opening, and try to kill Jalal." A heavy silence fell. Then Lucian shook his head. "I'm not leaving." Natsu's fist sparked with flame. "Neither am I." Gray's arms crackled with frost. "I'm not about to abandon Urza." Urza glanced at her two comrades, a touch of relief softening her stern expression. "Then we stand together. We'll face Jalal to the end." Resolute, the group steeled themselves for the coming battle, vowing to hold the line against the dark forces gathering beyond the mirror's edge. Lucian paused, recalculating their entire battle plan. He'd pushed Jalal hard, and the Dark Mage's reserves were likely all but spent. Now Lucian had a single, devastating option, an ancient storm spell amplified by the world's legendary magic wand. But it wouldn't be quick. "How long do you need?" Urza demanded, tightening her grip on her twin swords. "At least 7 minutes," Lucian admitted. He eyed the enormous magic crystal warily. He hated to leave it behind, but even its power couldn't speed up the ritual. If the spell succeeded, Jalal would fall for sure. If it failed, Lucian would abandon any claim on the crystal and withdraw everyone, even at the risk of his own life. Urza slid her armored breastplate back into place, steeled her expression, and squared her shoulders. "Don't worry," Lucian said. "We'll buy you that time." "Go to the island," Urza ordered, voice steely. "We'll hold him off." With that, Lucian and the others vanished in a flash of magic, leaving Urza alone against Jalal's gathering storm. Chapter 7. The Island in the Mirror World. Lucian urged his companions forward, their cloaks snapping in the icy gust as they soared toward the Mirror World island. At its heart stood a legendary magic crystal, said to transform any weapon it touched into a long-range projectile, an ability Jalal coveted. Yet Lucian understood Jalal's dilemma. Unleashing his devastating star collapse spell here would obliterate the very crystal he sought. Below them, jagged rocks jutted from a churning sea of silver light. Lucian signaled his team, Urza, Natsu, Gray, and Wendy, to hold formation. "Stay sharp," he warned. "Jalal's already casting something big." Before any of them could answer, the water exploded skyward in a towering tidal wave of prismatic spray. Lucian twisted his fingers, weaving a shimmering wind barrier that cut through the surge. The others followed suit. Urza's diamond armor glinted as she planted her sword into the island's soil, anchoring them in place. Natsu's flames licked the edges of the wave, vaporizing froth. Gray's ice froze pockets of water before shattering them. Wendy's wind ward dispersed spray into harmless wisps. When the waters finally fell silent, only Jalal remained, perched on a vast runic circle carved into a ledge outside the island's interior. He frowned, eyes cold and calculating. For a moment, the magical auras of Lucian and his friends blinked out of his sight. They shouldn't all be dead, he murmured. Jalal raised his arms, letting his celestial magic hum through the runes beneath his feet. He'd seen lesser mages washed away like sand in a cataract, but Urza Scarlet, even battered, was no ordinary target. As a member of the Magic Council, he had intimate knowledge of the fairy tale conflict and the true might of these intruders. There was no way they'd perish so easily. A faint smile curved his lips. Hiding won't save you. I'll find every last one of you. He summoned 2 glowing sigil circles before his eyes, their light weaving into a lattice that probed the air itself. Each heartbeat, each breath, each hidden pulse of magic was laid bare under his gaze. Deep within the island's twisted forest, Lucian crouched behind a stone arch. Moonlight filtered through warped branches, illuminating the crystal's pale glow in the clearing ahead. His heart hammered. He glanced over at Urza, whose scarlet hair gleamed like a beacon. "They're scanning for us," she whispered, voice low but steady. Lucian nodded. "We'll make them look the other way. Once Jalal's attention is focused elsewhere, I'll slip in and grab the crystal." Wendy hovered nearby, summoning a cluster of spectral feathers that drifted silently around her fingertips. Natsu cracked his knuckles, flames dancing along his arm, while Gray exhaled a plume of mist, ready to freeze. Together, they formed a perfect diversion squad. Outside the clearing, Jalal's voice thundered through the trees. "Show yourselves! I know you're in there!" Instantly, Natsu lunged upward, flames roaring in a spiral that lit the sky. Gray stomped, erecting pillars of ice that fractured the ground. Wendy released her feather sprites. They shot off like arrows, scattering in all directions. Urza stepped forward, her sword reflecting starlight into a dazzling flare. Just as Jalal pivoted toward the commotion, Lucian sprang from cover, cloaked in a veil of mana. He dashed across the crystalline sand, every step sure and silent. The crystal pulsed under his gaze like a living heart. Jalal's shout came too late. Lucian's grasp closed around the crystal's base, and the world rocked. Runic fractures spiderwebbed across the ground, shards of mirror raining down around him. He vaulted clear, his friends converging to form a protective circle as the island began to crumble. Jalal's roar of frustration echoed through the collapsing runes, but he could not stop them. They burst free of the mirror world, just as the isle shattered into glittering dust. Lucian pressed the crystal to his chest, its radiant warmth throbbing in his palm. Behind him, the wreckage faded to silence. He risked a backward glance at the spot where Jalal had stood. The council mage's silhouette lingered for an instant, eyes blazing with unspent power, before vanishing into the mirror's void. Lucian exhaled. "We've got it," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "But this isn't over. Jalal's coming for us, and this crystal is exactly what he wants." Urza placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." As they flew back toward their rendezvous point, the magic crystal nestled safely in Lucian's grip. Every heart among them pulsed with the same resolve. They would face whatever came next. Together. Jalal had served as the director of the Magic Development Bureau in his youth and was a prodigy born to master every branch of arcane study. He could grasp nearly any spell at a glance. In addition to his formidable celestial magic, he had learned a host of auxiliary magics, detection spells among them. "Found it," he muttered, tracing a faint distortion in the mirror realm's barrier. He slipped into another hidden dimension. Barely 2 minutes later, Jalal had pinpointed the spatial weak spot in the mirror's enchantment. With a wave of his hand, he braided space magic around the flaw, yanked it open, and stepped through. Once inside, he immediately felt the auras of Urza and the others, and he streaked toward the island. "So he really did come through," Jalal murmured. On the island itself, Lucian sensed Jalal's intrusion press against the boundary of the mirror realm. "We need to go," he said calmly. Leading Urza, Simon, and the rest toward the gleaming crystal mirror, he recited the sealing incantation. With a pulse of light, the mirror dissolved, and they slipped back into the real world. Simon exchanged a glance with Urza. He got in, he noted, but he wasn't surprised. After all, though the magics of their world and Jalal's differed in origin, their underlying principles were much the same. And none of them doubted that a genius like Jalal would find a way. Lucian's heart pounded as he watched Ikaruga's blade slice through the very fabric of space, aiming straight at Urza, now trapped within the cruel confines of a magic card. But Urza would not yield so easily. With a swift, defiant arc of her own sword, she carved a jagged tear in the card's seal and slipped free. In this world, even the most carefully woven spatial spells could be broken by true masters of the craft. No one was more formidable than Jalal. His mastery of countless arcane arts allowed him to pierce the illusion of the mirror world and step back into reality as if turning a page in a book. Reflexively, he called out, "So you thought you could hide from me?" His voice carried the chill of steel. Lucian drew a steady breath and led his friends out of the mirrored prison. One by one they emerged, battered, weary, but alive. Behind them, the shimmering walls of the mirror world folded in on themselves and vanished. Barely had Lucian set foot on solid ground when Jalal appeared before him, eyes blazing. "You," Jalal whispered, "I will finish this." Before Lucian could answer, Urza rushed forward, her twin swords gleaming like streaks of lightning. Hot on her heels came Natsu, Gray, Juvia, Lucy, Simon, Hugh, Wooly, and Miliana, each battered by the ordeal but refusing to surrender. Together they surged at Jalal in a chaotic wave of fire, ice, and steel. Lucian slipped back into the shadows, lips moving in a near-silent chant. He'd begun summoning an ancient, world-forgotten spell, one that demanded every scrap of his focus and strength. He could feel its power thrumming in his bones, a promise of salvation or ruin. Jalal met each onslaught with the effortless grace of a seasoned warrior. Flames curled around him, icicles shattered against his armor, and sword strikes rang off his defenses as if he were made of iron. Yet Urza and the others pressed on, their faces set with grim determination. Above them, the sky darkened in an instant. A single electric arc crackled against heavy clouds, and a distant rumble shook the ground. Lucy's hair whipped around her face. Something's coming, something big. As thunder rolled overhead, Lucian felt his ancient spell surge to life. This was it, their final stand. The storm gathered, reflecting the fury of the battle below. And at its heart stood Lucian, ready to unleash the power that could turn the tide or destroy them all. Thunder Giant. The others were on the brink of giving up, convinced Lucian would never finish his ritual in time. Yet he pressed on, voice calm and unwavering. The moment he uttered the final syllable, a surge of power erupted from within him. Iron-rich sand and fractured rocks from the island lifted into the air, coalescing into a hulking, electric-charged figure, the Thunder Giant. Lucian watched, eyes alight with determination, as the colossal form began to crackle with energy. His purpose was clear, to find out whether this avatar could siphon the storm's lightning and grow even stronger. Now, as jagged bolts cleaved the sky, the Thunder Giant opened its arms wide, drawing the furious currents into its very core. With his experiment underway and the tempest's power cascading around him, Lucian knew his family would be safe tonight. Tomorrow, he would resume his true quest, stronger than ever. Chapter 210, Shattering the Darkness with Thunder. "I will build a land of freedom," Jalal declared, his voice trembling with fervor. "In my darkest moments, Zareth whispered to me that I am the chosen one, destined to topple tyranny and forge a free nation by his side. Why can't you see that for such a glorious ideal, every sacrifice is justified?" With a frenzied cry, he unleashed a torrent of magic. One intricate circle after another bloomed in midair, sending searing beams of starlight crashing into the ground like celestial missiles. Urza's blade splintered under the onslaught. Natsu and Gray were thrown back, battered and bloodied, barely clinging to consciousness. Lucy's aqua was hurled through the spirit gate, vanishing in a flash of blue light. Only Juvia, her power to reabsorb water intact, managed to pull herself to her feet. Simon and the others lay scattered, grievously wounded. Urza staggered upright, blood trickling from her brow. Glaring at Jalal, she shouted through clenched teeth, "Your so-called dream dies with you, Jalal, because we still have Lucian." Above them, storm clouds roiled and crackled, lightning dancing along their edges. From that churning darkness, the immense form of the Thunder Titan began to materialize, its colossal shape coalescing behind Jalal. The air itself vibrated with power, heralding the final clash between light and shadow. Boom! Urza's words had barely died on her lips when Lucian unleashed a storm of lightning from his wand, each bolt striking Jalal as he hovered in midair. With a swift motion, Jalal traced a magic circle in the air. Starlight condensed into a radiant shield that blossomed before him. Spinning around, he locked eyes with Lucian, perched nonchalantly atop the Thunder Giant, and hissed, "I expected Urza to be my toughest opponent, but you, a mere cat?" Jalal had scouted Urza and her allies thoroughly. They were powerful, certainly, but within his estimates. Lucian, on the other hand, was a complete surprise. Initial reports labeled him a repair magic specialist, his talents comparable to the legendary Arc of Time. Later whispers spoke of burgeoning fire spells and offensive incantations, all hinting at nothing more than a standard S-rank wizard. When the cat mage slipped away from the battlefield earlier, Jalal paid him little mind. Once Urza and her comrades were dealt with, what harm could a single S-rank cause? Yet now, as bolts of lightning crashed against his defenses, it was painfully clear. Lucian's power far exceeded that of any ordinary S-rank. Lightning rained down on Jalal in an unrelenting barrage, each bolt as potent as the magic of an S-rank lightning mage. But this wasn't a single, devastating strike. It was a flood of power, wave after wave. Lucian's lips curved into a confident grin. You didn't see this coming. As Jalal's left hand flared with starlight, forming a shimmering shield to absorb another crackling blast, Lucian turned his focus to the 30-meter-tall Thunder Colossus at his side. The giant's massive right arm rose, fingers unfurling like iron talons. Now! Electricity crackled around the Colossus's fist, fusing with iron sand and shattered rock from the cratered earth. In an instant, the raw energy coalesced into a colossal electromagnetic cannon. Its barrel glowed white-hot as it discharged a searing beam of power straight at Jalal. Jalal held his ground. Starlight magic still hummed in his left hand, reinforcing the barrier against the oncoming lightning. At the same time, his right hand traced a series of elegant runes in midair, igniting a golden magic circle that hovered before him. Celestial magic, 6 constellations of stars. From the circle, 6 radiant star-shaped projectiles erupted like celestial cannons, streaking toward the electromagnetic beam. They collided with a thunderous roar, the light from the explosion so brilliant it turned night into day for a heartbeat. When the glare subsided, both the 6 stars and the cannon's energy had been utterly annihilated, an even clash that left nothing but a crackling afterglow. Lucian watched in frustration as the Thunder Giant's electromagnetic blast fizzled harmlessly off Jalal's barrier. He knew he had only one option left, to unleash the weapon he'd been saving for a moment just like this, his ultimate electromagnetic cannon, fused with ancient storm magic and his own lightning-altering powers. Closing his eyes, Lucian slipped into the heightened awareness of an ancient mage. He could taste the electric scent of the gathering clouds and feel raw storm energy humming through every atom of the air. When he opened his eyes again, they glowed with pale blue light. He raised his wand high and whispered the words of invocation. Above the battlefield, scattered lightning bolts arced between roiling thunderheads, seemingly random, but to Lucian they were threads waiting to be plucked. With a flick of his wrist, he drew every flash of lightning that had once hammered at Jalal into a single, concentrated beam. It funneled down through his wand and into the core of the Thunder Giant he'd summoned. At first, the giant, only 30 meters tall, stumbled under the forced injection of raw energy. Then its metal frame began to swell. Magnetic currents rippled outward, tearing grains of sand, jagged rocks, and even iron filings from the ground and pulling them into the giant's expanding form. The ocean itself shuddered as seawater surged toward the pulsating behemoth. In moments, it towered above its former self, surpassing the 100-meter colossus that Misaka Makoto had once commanded. But the growth didn't stop there. The giant's limbs elongated, its torso ballooned, and its shoulders stretched toward the storm clouds themselves, swelling until its height reached an astonishing 200 meters. The island trembled under its weight, and the sky seemed to bend around its colossal frame. Lucian lowered his wand, breathing hard. His last resort had become something far greater than he'd ever imagined, and now standing before him in thunder and lightning, was a force of nature capable of turning the tide of any battle. "It looks like this is as far as I can go." Lucian's voice crackled with effort as golden lightning arced around him. 200 meters, that was the maximum range he could control at his current 4th-level ability. Push any further, and he'd lose hold of the immense power surging through the Thunder Giant's colossal form. He would need to ascend to a 5th-level mage just to maintain this assault. What kind of magic is fueling this? Even Jalal, who'd remained composed until now, stared in disbelief. The Thunder Giant towered twice the height of the guild's magic crystal, a feat that rivaled Makarov's legendary giant magic. He remembered how Makarov once enlarged a small cat, but he'd never seen a creature of this magnitude. Could this be the ultimate move Lucian mentioned? Lucy, still reeling from the shock, struggled to her feet alongside the others. Their eyes widened at the revelation. A 200-meter colossus crackling with thunder. Not even Laxus could pull off something like this, Gray muttered, folding his arms. After all, Laxus, a grandson of the guild master and one of only a handful of S-class wizards, could fell Natsu with a single, devastating strike. Yet here stood something far beyond even his sister's explosive lightning magic. As the ground trembled beneath the Thunder Giant's steps, Fairy Tail's members exchanged glances. If Lucian couldn't push through this barrier, they would have to find another way to save their guild. Lucian stood at the center of the fray, lightning crackling around his fists. "Lucian," Natsu called out, his grin fierce. "Show them why Fairy Tail's Thunder Mage is the strongest. Beat him into the ground, make him understand that freedom stolen from others is no freedom at all." Natsu's body still glowed with residual recovery magic as he exhaled a roaring torrent of fire into the night sky. "Only an iron will to change the world can push history forward," he shouted. "If you stand in our way, then die trying." Across the battlefield, Jalal's eyes turned bloodshot. With swift, practiced movements, he began inscribing a vast, black magic circle in midair. His voice cut through the chaos. "Purgatory shatter!" Urza's heart slammed against her ribs when she recognized the forbidden spell. "Jalal, you can't— Are you really going to destroy the magic crystal tower too?" But Jalal's sigil already thrummed with dark energy. The Purgatory shatter was a perilous fusion of wind, water, fire, and earth, condensed into a living core of pure darkness. It had once been the deadliest weapon aboard the mobile fortress where they'd captured the Ghost Ruler. Not the crystal-mounted cannons, but this very spell, empowered by 4 elementalists under Joseph's command. Now, that same cataclysmic force was poised to unleash its wrath once more. Alaya, the Wind's champion, had already fallen to Lucian's blade, leaving her power unusable. Now Jalal, by drawing on his own reserves, prepared a forbidden spell, proving himself far stronger than Joseph ever was. "Destroy it completely," he ordered, eyes fixed on the weakening barrier. "If I must rebuild it in 5 years, so be it." Gathering every ounce of his arcane strength, Jalal poured mana into the black circle beneath his feet. Even the 200-meter-tall Thunder Giant shuddered under the surge of energy. Ignoring the strain on his magic crystal, Jalal thrust out his staff and intoned, "Forbidden magic, Purgatory break." A thick torrent of shadowy power blasted forward. Lucian didn't flinch. He called on the storm itself, drawing the Thunder Giant's crackling electricity into his outstretched gauntlet. Lightning coalesced around his fist as he unleashed his counterattack. "Crush the darkness with lightning, ultimate electromagnetic cannon." Chapter 211, The True Puppeteer Revealed, Part 2. Thunder and pitch-black shadow met in midair, producing a cataclysmic roar that ripped through the sky. In an instant, a shockwave exploded outward, splitting the crystal tower cleanly in two. The very island beneath their feet seemed to unravel under the force of that clash, fragments of earth drifting away like fallen petals. Lucian had anticipated the enemy's gambit. Moments before the storm of dark and lightning magic collided, he sent a telepathic warning to Urza and the others, laying out their only chance of survival. While the two opposing spells barreled toward each other, Xiam sprang into action, casting her portal ward to whisk the wounded to safety. Juvia, being the fittest of the group, clung to Xiam as she dove into the sea, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the devastation. Thank the gods, I boosted my body with giant's might, Lucian muttered to himself as he braced against the lingering tremors. Without that extra fortitude, he'd have been shattered along with the tower. Once the thunder and darkness recoiled, Lucian retrieved his wand and muttered a string of healing incantations. Soft golden light pulsed from its tip, knitting torn flesh and dulling the ache of shattered bones. Outside, the ruined tower billowed smoke and crackled with residual arcana, a stark reminder of just how close they'd come to annihilation. Lucian pressed a hand to his forehead. He was battered, but alive, and thanks to quick thinking and unforgettable teamwork, so was everyone else. Now all that remained was to discover who had orchestrated this infernal assault, and to stop them before they struck again. "Little one," Lucian murmured, eyes cold, "I gave you free rein. Now look what's left of you." Below him lay what had once been a sprawling island larger than the town itself. Now, smashed down by the sheer force of their clash, it was no bigger than a football field. Jalal lay motionless, his body charred, pitch black, unconscious from savage injuries. The forbidden spell he'd hurled, purgatory shattering, had been every bit as devastating as Lucian's ultimate electromagnetic cannon. Fortunately, Lucian was far more fragile by nature. Though he'd taken serious damage, a healer's touch would see him through. But as Lucian's gaze shifted, his heart sank. Scattered across the scorched soil were the remnants of his magic crystals, now less than 1% of their original number. He knelt, gingerly gathering the fractured fragments into his hands. "It's better than nothing," he whispered, swallowing his disappointment. There had simply been no time to shield them during the final surge of power. The fallout had obliterated the rest. Sliding the handful of surviving crystals into his supply case, he sealed it within his dimensional pouch. Even in their diminished state, these crystals would sustain him for 2 years, after which he'd find another way to replenish his reserves. "Lucian!" The distant shout tore him from his thoughts. Looking up, he braced for what came next. "Lucian!" Just after Lucian gathered the last of the magic crystals, Urza and the others broke the sea's surface. When they saw Lucian safe on the tiny island, barely the size of a football field, and Jalal crumpled unconscious on the sand, relief washed over them. Urza waded out, drew her new enchanted sword, and leveled the blade at Jalal's prone form. "Today I will end this," she said, voice tight with years of anguish. "This is the destiny I've carried for the past 8 years." 8 years ago, Urza had come here determined to save Jalal, restore the kind, just man she once knew before the Black Mages warped him. But after hearing Jalal's last words, she saw that any hope of redemption was gone. If left alive, he would only wreak more havoc. She'd resolved that mercy was a risk she could no longer afford. "Urza, wait," Lucian called, rushing forward. Something in Urza's narration and in Jalal's confession struck him as off. According to Urza, Jalal had once been noble, gentle, and just. But now, could her entire story be wrong? Or was there another truth hidden beneath the surface? Urza hesitated, blade wavering midair. On the shore, the others watched in stunned silence as Lucian stepped between them, determined to uncover the real story before any final blow could fall. Ever since Jalal fell into the Black Magician's clutches, his entire personality had shifted, so abruptly and completely that he scarcely resembled the man they once knew. He cast aside his old convictions, embraced the dark ambitions of his captor, and vowed himself to the resurrection of Zareth. Jalal insisted he'd heard Zareth's whispers, promises of true freedom that convinced him to abandon everything he once stood for. But Lucian knew better. No sane mind could undergo such a sweeping transformation overnight, especially not someone with Jalal's iron will. Even Urza, who understood Jalal's strength as well as anyone, had insisted that a change this profound would take months, if not years. The only reasonable explanation was long-term mind magic, something akin to the Soul Reaper's curse, a spell-crafted shackle on the psyche that could twist a person's thoughts and memories far more rapidly than any natural process. Left to his own devices, Lucian was certain Jalal's spirit would have shattered such control by now. "Legilimency," Lucian whispered. At his command, the sleek black familiar at his side leaped forward, pressing a velvet paw to Jalal's temple. In that instant, Lucian's telepathy fused with the forbidden art of mind-reading, plunging him into the tangled recesses of Jalal's mind. Lucian didn't bother with the formalities of a standard legilimency ritual. No need for Jalal to stay awake or lock eyes for minutes on end while he sifted through scraps of memory. Instead, he simply unleashed his psychic gift, overriding Jalal's defenses and layered on an intensified legilimency effect. The instant Lucian slipped into Jalal's mind, he sensed it, a hidden strand of spiritual energy, deeply embedded in the other man's consciousness. "Reveal yourself," Lucian murmured. His power flared, ripping the spirit free of its mental prison and drawing it out into Jalal's inner world, where it at last assumed its true form. "Ultia?" Lucian's voice cracked with surprise. He recognized her instantly, though they'd met only once before, back in Kroba City, when she'd presided over the council while he worked to repair the town's defenses. And now here she was again, her presence just as unexpected as it was unmistakable. "I never imagined my plan would be undone by a mere cat like you." The voice of Ulucia sneered through the corridors of Jalal's mind. Lucian stood firm in Jalal's inner sea of consciousness, his presence rippling like a titanic shadow. Ulucia, the council wizard who'd poisoned Jalal's thoughts, realized her residual magic was no match for him. With a final, mocking hiss, she spat out her parting words. "You may have broken my hold, but know this. He answers to another. His true master is a female mage on the council, also named Ulucia." Then she vanished into the ether. Lucian withdrew his hand and returned to the real world, where Urza, Simon, Natsu, and Lucy stood over Jalal's battered form. Their faces, once filled with suspicion and anger toward him, now reflected shock and relief. "He was being controlled," Lucian announced quietly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Ulucia had anchored her spirit to his mind. She forced him to turn against us." Urza's lips trembled as she knelt beside Jalal. Simon's usual stoicism cracked into sorrow. Even Natsu punched the air in frustration, and Lucy's eyes brimmed with tears of compassion. Natsu growled, "So he never wanted to betray us." Lucy added gently, "He's still the kind, caring Jalal we know." Lucian nodded. "Exactly, but look at him. He's gravely injured. We need to heal him before it's too late." He placed both hands over Jalal's chest and whispered the incantation for basic restoration. A soft, golden glow spread from Lucian's palms, knitting torn sinews and soothing the fever burning through Jalal's veins. Within moments, the bruises faded and his breathing steadied. Lucy gasped, "He looks as good as new." Urza laid a hand on Lucian's shoulder. "Thank you." Simon offered a rare, small smile. "He's alive because of you." As Jalal's eyelids fluttered open, Lucian allowed himself a moment's relief, yet under it lay a deeper concern. Ulucia's warning lingered. Someone else held sway over Jalal's destiny. And now that he was free, they had to be ready for whatever council intrigue lay ahead. Lucian's ultimate goal was to become Fairy Tale's next guildmaster. And to do that, he had to make the guild stronger. The more powerful Fairy Tale became, the greater the benefits he'd reap in this world. If it ever rose to be the world's foremost guild, Lucian wouldn't even need to leave its walls. Its mages would travel the globe on missions, bringing back every resource and rare magic he desired. That was why he believed that if Jalal could be restored to his old self, it would be wise to welcome him, and Simon and the others, into Fairy Tale's ranks. Chapter 212, Achieving Immortality, Update. Jalal's power is simply overwhelming. Without channeling the Thunder Giant's might or tapping into that ancient magic, no one could hope to stand against him. Had Urza and the others not bought us precious seconds, he never would have unleashed that final, devastating strike. In terms of pure strength, Jalal outclasses every combatant here. I'm certain that even Master Makarov, without resorting to fairy law, would fall short. Normally, Makarov is only marginally stronger than Joseph, and Joseph's power pales beside even a half-powered projection of Jalal's abilities. And though fairy law is the guild's trump card, its full potential remains a mystery. It's far from certain it could turn the tide against someone of Jalal's caliber. In fact, the last time Makarov tried to invoke it, Arya's surprise attack cut him off before he could finish. With Jalal now officially part of Fairy Tale, our guild counts 2 true 10 wizard saints among its ranks. Add talents like Simon and the others, while they may not yet hold S-class credentials, they're by far the strongest mages below that rank. Give them a few more years of rigorous training, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them ascend into S-class status as well. Lucian knew that when wizards spoke of S-class, they meant the highest echelon recognized by every guild, and Fairy Tail's standards were especially exacting. Even so, what intrigued him most was Jalal's celestial magic. Their injuries have stabilized, he said. Let's get them back to the guild. He retrieved the compact containment box, carefully placed Urza, Natsu, Gray, Lucy, and Happy inside, then stepped through the phantom gate to Magnolia. As they emerged in the guild's foyer, Mirajane, who'd been pacing anxiously, rushed forward. Lucian, how are they? Are Urza and the others all right? Lucian opened the box. They're fine, just bruised and exhausted. A few days' rest, and they'll recover completely. Mirajane let out a long sigh, pressing a hand to her chest. I just heard from Councilman Yajima that the magic spirit cannon was fired and the council's stronghold was destroyed. I nearly had a heart attack. Thank goodness you're all safe. Destroyed? Lucian's brow shot up in surprise. Mirajane nodded. They say it was the work of that female mage Ultia. Before she could finish, Urza stepped out of the box, wincing as she stretched. Natsu, Gray, Lucy, and Happy followed, each offering reassuring smiles. Mirajane hurried to help them to seats, her relief palpable. Lucian watched his friends settle in, silently vowing to get to the bottom of Ultia's attack, and to master every secret of Jalal's celestial magic along the way. Now that the council has been temporarily disbanded and is awaiting reorganization, tensions are higher than ever. It's Ultia again, Lucian muttered, tapping his whiskered chin in thought. There was no doubt she was allied with a dark guild, but which one? Despite the council's blockade and the combined efforts of the major guilds, the dark factions remained alarmingly active. Their members must be formidable indeed. Some could rival even the Holy Council's 10 most powerful mages. Lucian sighed inwardly. For the moment, the council simply didn't have the bandwidth to pursue Jalal's case. Makarov would need time to reconstruct the events at the Tower of Paradise, call in old favors, and marshal allies who could vouch for Jalal's innocence. Only then could they hope to sway the council's leaders and lift the unjust cloud that hung over Jalal's name. In truth, Jalal was as much a victim as anyone. A puppet from the start, he'd been manipulated since childhood by the true architect of the calamity, Ultir. But facts alone wouldn't move the council. To exonerate him, Lucian knew they had to gather solid proof, build a compelling narrative, and present it at exactly the right moment. Until then, every piece of the puzzle would have to be secured, and every hidden ally brought back into play. Only then could they confront Ultir and free Jalal from the shadow of her schemes. Fairy Tail had never been stronger, its coffers overflowing, its reputation unassailable, and its influence stretching from Magnolia to the very halls of the Magic Council. Thanks to their efforts, Zaref's attempted resurrection had been thwarted. With the council now disbanded and undergoing a complete reorganization, Master Makarov found himself juggling odd jobs for the new administration. At worst, he'd simply help rebuild the council from the ground up. Nothing to worry about. That very evening, Jalal awoke. The flood of 8 years' worth of memories and the weight of his past atrocities nearly crushed him, and he sank to his knees in agony. Urza, Simon, and the rest of the guildmates gathered around, offering steady hands and gentle words until the storm inside him finally stilled. By dawn, Makarov guided the freshly overhauled moving castle back into Magnolia. Lucian briefed him in full on the Tower of Paradise debacle, how mind control had ensnared Jalal and 5 others, and how they'd all finally been freed. Stroking his beard, Makarov nodded, and on Lucian's advice, formally welcomed Jalal and the 5 rescued mages into Fairy Tail's fold. Next came the delicate part, arranging for support and guidance as Jalal rebuilt his life. Makarov dispatched messages far and wide, seeking out former Fairy Tail wizards whose talents and stature could aid in Jalal's rehabilitation. Many ex-members now commanded extraordinary positions. Take Volod Shinkin, for instance, one of Fairy Tail's founding magicians. He'd risen to the rank of 4th Wizard Saint, his influence second only to the kingdom's Archmage. With the guild's doors open and its network of allies at the ready, Fairy Tail stood poised to help Jalal and the others find their place in a world they'd once nearly destroyed. Senator Yajima was there too, along with the guild masters of Blue Pegasus and Forehound, both of whom once served under Fairy Tail and now rank just beneath it in power. After a lengthy struggle, the Magic Council finally accepted Jalal's innocence, formally pardoned him, and refocused the national manhunt on the rogue wizardess Altir. Meanwhile, Fairy Tail's mobile castle has been completely transformed. The old two-story guild hall was torn down and grafted onto the mobile fortress above. A grand staircase now descends to the restored underground library, and additional stairways extend from every side of the castle, linking all floors and wings. The new guild hall stands as Magnolia's tallest, most striking building, its spires and ramparts bristling with magic crystal cannons and advanced light-condensing arrays. Even the member dormitories, once scattered throughout the city, have been moved into the castle's vast chambers. Guild rent still applies, but it's far cheaper than the old lodgings, making the grandeurs of Fairy Tail more accessible than ever. Lucian wasn't the only one who traded comfort for convenience. Even Lucy, who prized her spacious rented manor above all, gave it up to move into the guild's fortress. Lucian followed suit, though he couldn't resist a few personal alterations. With a traceless extension spell, he secretly enlarged his new quarters, creating ample room for his arcane experiments. He stood in the heart of that expanded chamber and began to inscribe a magic circle on the stone floor. "Morgana's ring," he whispered, each letter glowing faintly as he traced the seal. From a silken pouch at his belt, he withdrew a single magic crystal and carefully placed it in his outstretched palm. Then, he eased himself into a meditative stance, closing his eyes as he began to draw the crystal's power into his very being. Thanks to the tireless devotion of his panda clone and the crystal's ability to multiply his progress over tenfold, Lucian's mage level had skyrocketed to 499. He was on the cusp of breaking through to level 500. At that legendary threshold, both his original body and every one of his clones would become immortal, no longer bound by the ticking clock of a mortal lifespan. He had set aside all new spells and studies to focus entirely on this one objective. After all, raw power means little if you can't live long enough to master it. Only with endless time at his disposal could he truly plumb the depths of magic and ascend to his ultimate potential. Reaching level 500 wasn't just a milestone, it was the gateway to eternity. Here it comes. As the crystal in Lucian's hand dissolved into shimmering motes, the stored magic within him burst free, flooding every vein and fiber of his being. Under this surging power, his cells restructured, strengthening and renewing themselves in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. A profound change rippled through him, and as the last of the energy coalesced at his core, Lucian felt an unshakable certainty settle in his bones. Time itself could no longer touch him. In that exhilarating moment, he broke through, reaching level 500. Chapter 213, Lucian, the most terrifying wizard in Nocturne Alley. A few days before the new term began at Hogwarts, Lucian returned to his home in Nocturne Alley, London, after spending the summer in Paris. Hermione had gone back to England 2 weeks earlier. Her father's dental practice couldn't be left unattended. Traveling with Lucian was Amy, who was about to take up the post of Deputy Director in the Ministry of Magic's Department of International Magical Cooperation. Although Amy was counted among the top aurors, she still struggled with silent and wandless spellcasting. She, like Lucian, would have to wait until term started to study those arts under Professor Snape's tutelage. No matter how skilled an auror might be, few wizards in the world could match the prowess of Hogwarts faculty. Snape, Flitwick, McGonagall, let alone Albus Dumbledore, undisputedly the greatest wizard alive. Even Voldemort himself had to give way before such power. That was why Lucian was so eager to return to Hogwarts. There, surrounded by legends, he would finally learn what mastery truly meant. Lucian set aside thoughts of his exploits in other worlds and focused on his standing within this one's magic system. By its own standards, his raw power wasn't extraordinary. He had simply used the combined knowledge of multiple minds to speed through spellwork, but in essence, he was nothing more than an outstanding 7th-year wizard fresh out of Hogwarts. Many of the deeper principles still eluded him. He couldn't, for instance, invent new spells the way Snape once had. Countless charms and curses remained on his to-learn list. The Red Loyalty Curse, the Hour Reversal Charm, Advanced Weather Magic, powerful hexes, the summoning key, enchanted vehicles, even the flu network itself. Mastering any one of these would be a boon in any world. That said, Lucian's overall strength was no joke. When you combined every school of magic he'd ever studied with the superpowers he'd acquired elsewhere, resurrected Voldemort would give him pause, and so might Dumbledore. A duel between any two of them could go either way. "Sirius Black," Lucian muttered under his breath, recalling tales of the man's ferocity. "That one really is dangerous." On the final morning before term started, he sat at the breakfast table, absorbing the latest issue of the Daily Prophet. The headline blared, "Prison Break, Sirius Black on the Loose." Lucian sighed, folded the paper, and steeled himself for whatever this school year might bring. Sirius had been on the run for months. To save face after his escape, the Ministry of Magic reassigned every officer from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to the manhunt, yet not a single clue turned up. What the Ministry didn't know was that Sirius was an animagus, able to slip into animal form whenever he needed to disappear. Lucian, meanwhile, had already unearthed the animagus transformation ritual in Hogwarts' restricted section, though he'd never dared to try it himself. The reason was simple. Mastering the procedure could take anywhere from a month at best to several months if he went slowly. More importantly, turning into an ordinary animal felt practically useless. He wouldn't gain any real edge over his pursuers. Still, Lucian's curiosity was piqued by the notion of transcending those limits. By law, animagi can only become mundane beasts, but Lucian allowed himself a daring hypothesis. If, in another life, or another world, say, the one where his fairy tale clone obtained the dragon crystal and awakened a dragon slayer's physiology, he might carry enough magical potential to shift into a dragon itself. The idea was as thrilling as it was reckless, and he couldn't decide whether he was frightened or exhilarated by the possibility. It wasn't some watered-down, make-believe dragon lifted from the Harry Potter stories. It was a genuine fairy tale dragon, coiled in Lucian's shop like it belonged there. "Lucian? Lucian, are you in?" Lucian was out back, sipping tea and scanning the Daily Prophet, when he heard two familiar voices calling from the street. He set down his cup, folded the paper, and stepped through the door. Standing on the narrow alleyway were Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, Harry Potter, their friend Luo Feng, and surprisingly, Fred and George Weasley. "What on earth are you all doing here?" Lucian asked. Nocturne Alley wasn't exactly a popular destination for respectable witches and wizards. Most had been warned to steer clear. Hermione exchanged a quick glance with Ginny before answering, "We came to fetch you for back-to-school shopping." "Yeah," George added. "We figured we'd get everything done today so we don't end up rushing tomorrow." They explained that bright and early that morning, the Weasleys and Grangers had swept into Diagon Alley to buy their Hogwarts supplies. Tonight, they'd stay at the Leaky Cauldron, then head to King's Cross first thing in the morning. Lucian raised an eyebrow. "And Harry's staying at the Leaky Cauldron too," Ginny said with a smirk. "He had to leave the Dursleys after accidentally inflating his Aunt Marge with an expansion charm." Lucian couldn't help but laugh. "All right, then. Lead the way. I'll just bring the dragon." With that, the unlikely party set off down Nocturne Alley, Lucian trailing behind as the real fairy tale dragon uncoiled and followed close on his heels. Lucian never imagined word of his address in Nocturne Alley would spread so quickly. Yet here they were, Fred and George Weasley, Hermione Granger, Ginny Weasley, Ron Weasley, and Harry Potter, standing before his front door. The Weasley twins had long been drawn to Nocturne's shadowy shops. Hermione and Ginny were more concerned for Lucian's safety. Harry had only seen the alley in a wild last-minute dash the previous year. All of them buzzed with curiosity. "Mind if we come in?" Hermione asked, peering at the cracked wood. Lucian stepped aside. "Of course, it's not as grim as they say." Inside, the parlor was modest but tidy. Battered armchairs, schoolbooks stacked on a scarred table, and a single flickering candle in the corner. The smell of ink and parchment lingered in the air. Fred grinned. "This place is even darker than I expected, but you seem right at home." Lucian shrugged, settling into an armchair. "Actually, I like it. It's quieter than Diagon Alley." Ginny frowned. "But isn't it dangerous? I worry you'll run into unpleasant types." He smiled. "I've learned to keep my head down. And well, I'm a Gryffindor. Bravery helps. Ron gave a nervous laugh. Bravery's one thing, living here year-round is another. Harry clapped Lucian on the shoulder. We're really impressed you've made it work. Lucian stood and pulled on his cloak. All right, since we're all here anyway, Diagon Alley's just around the corner. I still need to grab this year's textbooks. They piled back into the narrow street. As they emerged into the brighter bustle of Diagon Alley, Hermione hurried off to Flourish and Blots, and Fred and George drifted towards Zonko's. Lucian paused in front of the bookshop window. I've already read most of the second-year tomes, he confessed, but the Monster Book of Monsters, new magical creatures course material, has me a bit uneasy. Ron walked beside him, eyes wide. I don't know how you do it, living in Nocturne and still keeping that calm. Lucian smiled and nudged him forward. Come on, let's get these books before the rush. Who knows? Maybe I'll give you a few tips on surviving Nocturne Alley too. Nocturne Alley was unsettling enough by daylight. Its crooked signs, flickering lanterns, and grimy storefronts hinted at every imaginable vice. But the wizards haunting its shadows were downright terrifying. If Lucian and his friends hadn't drawn their wands the moment they stepped across the threshold, they might have sworn they were about to be dragged off by some dark wizard for a very unpleasant fate. Why are they acting so weird all of a sudden? Ron muttered, glancing around in confusion. Only moments earlier, every hooded figure lining the alley had leveled their wands at the newcomers, their pale faces lit by greed and malice, like wolves eyeing helpless rabbits. Now, without a single word or threatening gesture from Lucian's group, those same wizards spun on their heels and fled as though Nocturne Alley itself had caught fire. Shop doors slammed shut in rapid succession, shutters rattling noisily as proprietors bolted themselves inside. They've probably all developed a collective brain seizure, Lucian said with a casual shrug, hiding the quiet satisfaction that tugged at his lips. After all, it wasn't luck or coincidence that had sent these rogues scuttling away. It was something only he could have done. Since returning to Nocturne Alley a few days ago, Lucian hadn't been idle. Determined to stop the shop breakings that plagued the street whenever he was at school, he made the rounds himself, visiting each proprietor and conducting what looked like friendly negotiations. No shady black wizard who dared prowl the alley escaped his scrutiny. After feeling the sting of his electrifying spells several times over, they now trembled at the mere sight of him. The once weak apprentice of an old dark wizard had quietly reinvented himself as the most feared sorcerer in Nocturne Alley. Chapter 214, Why is he so good? Nobody doubted Lucian's story. To them, dark wizards were fanatics, prone to outrageous schemes, so Lucian's account seemed entirely believable. Only Hermione studied him with a thoughtful expression. She'd seen firsthand the force of his magic during their mission in Paris. Lucian, I heard you were awarded the Medal of Bravery by the French Ministry of Magic, Ginny said, her eyes sparkling, as they stepped out of Nocturne Alley. Immediately, the others gathered around. None of them wanted to miss the details. They'd all read the Daily Prophets report, and Hermione had teased them about it ever since breakfast. Now everyone was itching to know exactly how he'd managed to subdue one of the world's most notorious dark wizards. Lucian shrugged, a modest flush coloring his cheeks. Believe me, it was mostly the Auror's doing. I just chipped in a bit. Ginny crossed her arms, unconvinced. Hermione told me you took on half a dozen Death Eaters single-handedly and rescued her in the nick of time. The others exchanged amused glances. There was no way they were accepting his humble denial. Under their expectant stares, Lucian cleared his throat and began to lay out the battle. The precise moments he unleashed each spell, the narrow duck-and-weave maneuvers that kept curses at bay, and the split-second counters that turned the fight in his favor. As he spoke, his friends leaned in, spellbound by the tale of courage and cunning that had earned him his medal. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Lucian emerged blinking from the gloom of Nocturne Alley into the bright bustle of Diagon Alley. They still felt the adrenaline of their makeshift duels, having almost no real-world experience with wandwork beyond basic spells, but the thrill of it lingered even now. Hermione's eyes brightened as she tightened the straps on her school bag. First stop, book shopping, she declared. Right you are, said Ron, and Lucian fell in beside him with a nod. They made their way down the cobbled street toward Flourish and Blots. Inside the familiar bookshop, however, something was different. Rows of neatly stacked shelves had been replaced by a single, enormous iron cage. Lucian paused at its bars. More than 100 ragged, furry volumes tumbled and twisted within, as if alive, tearing at one another in a frenzy. "Good heavens," Harry whispered. Ron rifled through the shopping list in his hand. "It's the Monster Book of Monsters," he explained. "Required text for care of magical creatures." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "But that class doesn't start until 3rd year." Lucian exchanged a grin with Ron. "True, but I'm curious. I'm only in 2nd year, so it's not mandatory yet, but I'd love to flip through it now and then." Hermione gave him a half smile. "Be careful, those things have a reputation." As Flourish and Blot's doors swung closed behind them, Lucian's eyes were fixed on the writhing grimoire. If nothing else, his school years promised to be more interesting than he'd ever imagined. Lucian no longer studied magical creatures just to turn a profit. He was fascinated by the raw, instinctive magic they possessed. After all, the fundamental laws of magic are the same across the board. Countless wizarding inventions owe their existence to creatures like nifflers and hippogriffs, and many groundbreaking spells have emerged from examining the unique abilities of magical beasts. By learning more about these creatures, Lucian was broadening his own magical vocabulary and potentially unlocking new applications of magic. If he could replicate a Zou's talent for slipping through spatial barriers, for instance, he'd never have to worry about enemy wards blocking his apparition. With that goal in mind, Lucian and his friends headed for a cramped stall whose shelves buckled under the weight of half-forgotten tomes. Lucian approached the counter and asked, "Can I get 4 copies of the Monster's Monster Manual, please?" The shopkeeper's face instantly fell. He leaned back, exasperated. 4 copies? No, I'm done with that garbage. Last time I ordered 200 invisibility handbooks, spent a small fortune, and not one of them worked. Couldn't even cast so much as a shadow. Trust me, I'm never stocking that stuff again. Lucian crouched by the workbench, glancing warily at the battered leather volumes piled before him. "Next time, I'm never buying these things again," he muttered. Slipping on a pair of thick, reinforced gloves, he picked up a hefty wooden staff, its surface chewed and gouged by countless sharp teeth, and squared his shoulders. Beyond the bench stood a towering iron cage, its bars rattling with unnatural movement. "Let me try," the clerk offered, voice quavering as he thrust a thin pole toward the cage. Before he could pull it back, a hulking book lunged, sinking its jagged pages into the wood. The staff shuddered violently as bristling teeth tore through the glove's leather, pinning the clerk's hand against the bars. He yelped, stumbling backward, and another book snapped at his other arm, its pages clamping down like a steel trap. Desperately, he tried to wrest his hand free, but the grip was unbreakable. Lucian sighed and rose to his full height. "Stay back," he warned, striding forward. Wizards who enchanted these volumes must have been mad, or they simply didn't care if a young mage lost an arm or two. After all, in their world, severed limbs could be reattached in a pinch. Still, it seemed reckless to unleash such vicious creatures. He tapped the cage's bars, waiting for their eyes to settle on him. Then, with a firm grip on his staff, he called forth a thin ribbon of flame at its tip, a controlled spark of fiery fire, far removed from the destructive inferno its name implied. The monster books recoiled, hissing pages fanned by the heat. Lucian jabbed the flaming staff between the bars, pressing it gently against a snarling tome. The leather cover blistered and curled, and with a final, resentful squeal, the book slithered back toward the group, leaving the clerk's gloves torn but his hands free. Lucian knelt beside him and tugged the shredded leather away, revealing bruised but intact skin. "Thanks," the clerk gasped, rubbing his wrist. Lucian offered a tight smile. "Next time," he said, "we skip the monster books altogether." With that, he guided the clerk away from the cage as the remaining volumes lurked in the shadows, their pages rustling like trapped beasts. Lucian didn't hesitate. Before the shopkeeper could finish warning him to keep his hand out of the cage, Lucian's arm shot in like a striking serpent. In the same instant, he yanked a struggling monster tome free, wound a length of rope tightly around its covers, and knotted it off. Then he moved on to the next. then the next, until 4 of the unruly books lay bound and silent at his feet. Each one seemed to melt under his grip. They reared and snapped at first, but Lucian's strength overwhelmed them at once. The shopkeeper and Harry stared, mouths agape. It wasn't magic that stopped the book's resistance, just raw power. Lucian's current physique left the tomes no purchase to bite or claw. Once he'd wrapped them, they could not budge. As Lucian and Harry turned to leave, the shopkeeper dashed forward. He caught Lucian's sleeve, eyes wide with relief. "All your monster tomes are 20% off today," he blurted, voice trembling a little. "Please, you've got to help me bind the rest. I don't want another of those things snapping at me." He shivered at the memory. "My little brother was bitten by one yesterday. He nearly didn't make it." Lucian gave a quick, easy smile and shook his head. "We're old friends, remember? It's nothing." With that, he slung the first 4 bound tomes over his shoulder and strode out of the shop, Harry close behind, already planning where they'd shelve their prizes. Lucian strode up to the cage with quiet confidence. To save time, he didn't bother reaching through the bars. Instead, he lifted the door and walked right in. No sooner had he stepped inside than the monster books sprang to life, fluttering and blocked, snapping at him. In an instant, Lucian's hands became a blur, like 1,000-armed Guanyin, snatching each snarling volume, binding them with rope, and stacking them neatly at his feet. 30 seconds later, well over 100 books lay subdued. "Why is he always this good?" Ron exclaimed, eyes wide. In his view, Lucian had no weaknesses. He excelled at everything he tried. "I wish I could do that," Harry muttered with a touch of envy. Even as the famed boy who lived and a star chaser on the Quidditch pitch, Harry felt only average in every other skill. "Because he works harder than anyone else," Hermione said, rolling her eyes. "If you two spent as much time studying as Lucian does, you wouldn't be stuck copying my summer homework right now." Whenever she was in Paris, she made it a point to visit Lucian. Even on summer break, he never let up on his studies. Outside of short pauses for sleep, meals, and the occasional trip to the bathroom, he spent every waking moment poring over books or practicing magic. She admired him from the bottom of her heart. Raw talent alone is impressive, but talent backed by relentless hard work, that's truly formidable, because no matter how hard you push yourself, you'll never catch up. Chapter 215, Alchemy Master Arthur, Second Update. Lucian and his friends stepped out of Flourish and Blots, waved off by the beaming shopkeepers, then continued down the bustling streets of Diagon Alley. After gathering the last of their magical study aids, parchment, quills, and a curious little brass sundial, Hermione paused in front of a prowling display of pets. "I'm going to get one this time," she declared, her eyes scanning the cages. "I've spent the last 2 years on books, and everyone else has a familiar but me. An owl would be perfect. No more trips to the post office every time I write a letter." "It seems meant to be," Lucian murmured as Hermione coaxed a ginger kitten from its basket. Its squashed little face made it look perpetually grumpy, but when it nuzzled Hermione's hand, she was sold. With the new pet tucked into a snug, leather-padded box, the group's stomachs reminded them it was past midday. They headed for the leaky cauldron, its warm lamps and low chatter a welcome respite from the alley's hustle. Inside, at the far end of the bar, sat Arthur Weasley, Ron's father, leafing through the latest Daily Prophet. His lanky frame and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an affable, almost scholarly air, and Lucian recognized him at once. The ministry's resident alchemy enthusiast, who loved nothing more than grafting muggle gadgets to magical enchantments. Arthur looked up and offered a friendly wave, then returned his attention to the newspaper. Lucian leaned in for a better look at the front-page headline, Sirius Black's Midnight Escape, accompanied by a grainy photograph of the notorious prisoner. He appeared gaunt, with hollowed cheeks and eyes that glittered with wild intelligence. The article screamed of danger and dark reputations, yet Lucian's curiosity only deepened. If Black had truly broken free, who knew what ripple effect that would have on the magical community and on Arthur's wondrous experiments? Pushing thoughts of fugitives aside, Lucian slid onto a bench beside Ron and Hermione. Hermione carefully lifted her kitten into her lap, cooing as it curled up, purring softly. Ron was already debating the merits of cottage pie versus fish and chips. Over clinking cutlery and warm conversation, The trio settled into the comforting rhythm of friendship. Tomorrow they'd return to their studies and perhaps catch up with the latest developments in Arthur Weasley's alchemical workshop. But for now, lunch at the Leaky Cauldron felt just right. Arthur lowered his newspaper and peered at the newcomer. "Welcome back, and who might you be?" Lucian hesitated for a moment before Ginny bounded forward. "Dad, this is Lucian. I told you about him already." Arthur's eyes lit up with recognition. "Lucian, of course. The youngest national Quidditch player and the youngest recipient of the Valor Badge. Your sister speaks of you all the time, says you're the most talented first-year wizard she's ever met." He studied Lucian with genuine admiration. From whispered conversations and Ginny's proud tone, Arthur already knew that it had been Lucian's encouragement that gave Ginny the strength to expose Voldemort's diary. Lucian squared his shoulders and offered a polite bow. "Mr. Weasley, I've heard you're an expert in alchemy. Your enchanted Ford Anglia is practically legendary. I've been studying alchemy on my own and would be honored if I might ask your advice sometime." Arthur's smile widened as he folded his newspaper. "Alchemy, you say? You've certainly come to the right place. I've guided my boys on all sorts of tinkering, skiving snack boxes, extendable ears, you name it. There's no better teacher for a budding alchemist than an old Weasley." He stood and gestured toward the fireplace. "Why don't we have a chat by the hearth? Ginny, run along now. Leave Lucian and me to talk shop." With one last grin, Ginny scampered upstairs. Left alone in the warm glow of the Burrow's kitchen, Arthur and Lucian settled beside the crackling fire, ready to delve into the mysteries of alchemical transfiguration. Lucian found Arthur in the sunlit corridors of Wizarding Towers, brimming with a new question. "Professor," he began hesitantly, "I know it sounds odd, but I've been thinking. If I combined an undetectable extension charm with a Muggle refrigerator, could I actually maintain a patch of winter inside while the rest of the world swelters through summer?" The mention of charms and refrigeration made Arthur's eyes light up. Within moments, he was elaborating on the interplay between containment enchantments and thermodynamic principles, sketching diagrams in the air with a flick of his wand. Lucian seized the opportunity. These one-on-one sessions were too rare to waste, and rattled off the thorny problems he'd encountered in his self-directed alchemical studies. They discussed everything from the structural resilience of the refrigerator's lining to the risk of atmospheric leakage, chasing a workable theory deep into the afternoon. Only when the glow of sunset filtered through the windows did they realize how long they'd been at it. Lucian stretched, rubbing his tired wrists. "If I'd known this summer would be so productive," he admitted, "I might have carved out time to visit Ron's family in Ottery St. Catchpole." They made their way to the Leaky Cauldron for a well-earned supper, settling at their usual hearthside table. Over mugs of butterbeer, Lucian reflected on his progress. In just half a day under Arthur's guidance, he'd leapfrogged months of solitary study. Textbooks often buried him in impenetrable jargon, but Arthur had a knack for translating complex concepts into clear, intuitive language. Lucian was convinced that if Hogwarts ever introduced a formal alchemy course, Arthur would be the perfect professor, and he'd sign up without hesitation. Lucian settled back on his trunk and exhaled. He'd have to wait until next summer vacation to visit the Burrow again, but in the meantime, he promised himself he'd write often and keep up his correspondence with Fred and George Weasley. He'd always admired the twins' knack for alchemy. On the surface, their inventions were prank props, stink pellets, canary crunch biscuits, trick wands, but in skilled hands some were surprisingly potent. A single fat-tongued toffee, if savored too eagerly, could leave your tongue ballooned to twice its size, making speech all but impossible. Biting down on a constipation cube guaranteed a day or two of rather unpleasant digestive distress. The notorious handle-biter bolt, affixed to any doorknob, snapped shut like an angry serpent the moment someone dared to turn it, often claiming a fingertip in the process. And 1 minute after munching a Canary Crunch biscuit, you'd find yourself transformed into a small, squawking bird, only to revert to human form once the spell wore off. All of which made their scholastic galleys stand out at Hogwarts fairs, and Lucian suspected helped the twins hone their skills for more serious mischief down the road. The next morning, Lucian hoisted his trunk, tucked his tawny owl Peppa into a roomy cage, and trudged toward the leaky cauldron. At the pub's back alley, 2 gleaming Ministry motor cars stood idling. Mr. Weasley waved Lucian over. Since my old Ford Anglia is currently indisposed, the Ministry's kindly provided a replacement, he explained with a grin. They've sent one of these enchanted cars to ferry the whole lot of us to King's Cross. Lucian climbed into the back seat beside Charlie, Bill, Fred, and George. The engine hummed, the enchanted wheels shimmered, and off they went. Straight toward Platform 9 3/4, another Hogwarts term, waiting just around the corner. Lucian understood all too well why Minister Fudge had gone to such lengths. He was terrified that Sirius Black might use any opportunity, especially while Harry was traveling, to harm the boy in revenge. So Fudge had ordered Aurors to drive the enchanted motorcar and escort them to Hogwarts. Sirius's escape from Azkaban had thrown the Ministry into chaos. If anything happened to Harry, Fudge would undoubtedly be forced out of Offie, C. To shore up his position, he'd even announced an enormous bounty, 10,000 gold galleons, for anyone who could capture Black. Since a minister's monthly salary was only 400 galleons, the reward was a fortune to an ordinary witch or wizard. Ron Weasley lugged his trunk onto the platform, muttering to Harry as he strapped on his collarless sweatshirt. I can't wait to get on that train. At least once we're at Hogwarts, I'll be away from Percy. Today he got so mad at me for spilling tea on his photo of Penelope Clearwater, his precious girlfriend. You should have seen her hiding behind the frame, her nose all covered in tea stains. As Ron finished complaining, he looked down the platform and spotted Lucian standing there, trunk in hand. He waved energetically. Oi, Lucian, he called. Lucian lifted his head and offered a tired but grateful smile in return. Lucian stretched and waved as he stepped into the common room. Good morning, Lucian, Harry called cheerfully. Morning, Harry. Morning, Ron, Lucian replied, returning their greetings. From upstairs came Ginny's exasperated voice. Mum, I've told you a dozen times. I've checked everything. Stop worrying. She must have heard her brothers, though, because her tone softened instantly. Okay, Mum, I'll check one more time. Happy now? Harry exhaled in relief. I can live with that, he murmured. Colin Creevy's constant attention had been trying enough. He didn't need Ginny's puppy love on top of it. At that moment, Hermione appeared on the top step, a wicker basket balanced in one arm and Crookshanks purring contentedly inside. She gave the cat a gentle scratch behind the ears, then shooed Ron aside. Ready to leave, Lucian? You're always so punctual. Ron stamped his foot. You're not letting Crookshanks harass my poor Scabbers, are you? Hermione shot him an amused look, but paid him no mind. With one hand on the basket and the other catching Lucian's elbow, she guided him out of the leaky cauldron and into the bustling London morning. Lucian, let's head to the front door and wait for the car. Did you and Ron argue? Lucian gave a knowing smile. He had to admit, there was something oddly entertaining about watching kids bicker. Lucian Blackthorne leaned against the worn wooden counter of the leaky cauldron, watching Hermione's indignation flare. Humph! Who gave him the right to insult Crookshanks? Hermione snapped, arms folded tightly. She jabbed a finger at the orange ball of fur perched on the table. He even called Crookshanks a little monster. But my cat is absolutely gorgeous. Gorgeous? Lucian echoed with a chuckle. He regarded Crookshanks's round, persimmon-shaped face and narrow, knobby paws. Most people wouldn't call him pretty. Some might even find him comically odd, much like bull terriers or Shar-Peis. Yet those same quirks endeared them to many. And Crookshanks wasn't just any cat. With measle blood in his veins, he sensed malice as easily as a bloodhound follows a scent. That uncanny intuition explained the cat's single-minded pursuit of Scabbers, Pettigrew's cursed disguise. A sudden screech of tires outside drew their attention to the street. 2 sleek Ministry of Magic cars pulled up, engines idling. Nymphadora Tonks burst from the nearest vehicle, her multicolored hair bouncing beneath a red jacket and jeans. Spotting the pair inside, she swept through the tavern's door in a single bound. Lucian Blackthorne, in the flesh, she called, grinning as she approached. Long time no see. Bringing a girlfriend to Diagon Alley at last? Hermione's cheeks flushed scarlet, while Lucian grinned back, straightening from his spot at the counter. Tonks, he said, you know Hermione's just here. Tonks waggled her eyebrows, clearly enjoying the teasing, as the three friends prepared to step back into the bustle of Diagon Alley. Lucian gave Tonks a friendly grin as she approached. "Long time no see, Tonks. I heard you've just been made a full Auror. Congratulations." She returned his smile with a quick nod, her expression all business. Lucian, ever cheerful, shrugged it off and waved her over. He hadn't expected her to be assigned to the escort detail bringing Harry Potter to the train station. Just then, Harry and Ron arrived, and Ron couldn't help but notice Hermione's flushed cheeks. "Hermione, are you all right? You look kind of hot." Hermione shot him a sharp look, hoisted her trunk, and hurried toward the car. "I just piled on more layers this morning," she muttered over her shoulder. The clatter of hooves drew everyone's attention. The Ministry's enchanted carriage had pulled up. "There it is," Mrs. Weasley called, bustling forward. "Hurry up, all of you." Inside the carriage, the ride to King's Cross was uneventful. At the station, they passed through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 without incident. Lucian hoisted his trunk onto his shoulder, glanced up at his companions, and strode through the barrier. Once aboard the Hogwarts Express, he located their compartment in carriage 2 and settled in. Thanks to their stay at the Leaky Cauldron and the Ministry's transport, they'd been among the first students to arrive, and the compartment was still empty. Lucian set down his luggage with a contented sigh. The journey was just beginning. Lucian settled into the back seat of the car alongside Ginny. A moment later, Colin and Luna climbed in as well, waving cheerfully. "Hey, over here!" Ginny called, smiling at Lucian. "I messaged Colin and Luna earlier, asking them to meet us so we could ride to school together, just like last year." "I see," Lucian said, nodding. He couldn't help but feel that none of this was accidental, that someone had orchestrated every detail. Yet he didn't mind. Who he rode with on the way to school made little difference to him now. He used to worry constantly about his reputation, convinced that a spotless record would pave the way for future success. But over the past year, his abilities had grown so rapidly that he no longer cared about whispers or schemes. Raw power had a way of rendering subtle plots, and even social standing, irrelevant. He still marveled at how dramatically his strength had surged in what was officially just 12 months. In truth, how, ever, if he counted all the time logged by his original body and its several clones, he'd experienced far more than a single year's worth of growth. And it was only the beginning. As the car rolled forward, Lucian leaned back, feeling the quiet thrill of unshakable confidence as the cityscape slipped by. The Hogwarts Express rumbled steadily north, cutting through ever more desolate countryside. Heavy clouds rolled in until the sky darkened, and by mid-afternoon, around 3 or 4 o'clock, a fine rain began to blur the distant, rolling hills. Within minutes, the drizzle swelled into a downpour. Windows turned to misty gray sheets, and the carriage lights, both in the aisles and above the luggage racks, blinked on as the train clattered on. Suddenly, the steady rhythm of wheels was drowned out by the roar of rain and the hiss of wind against the glass. Lucian sat at a small table with a comprehensive guide to alchemy open before him. Ginny slumped forward, fast asleep, chin resting on her folded arms. Across the table, Luna and Colin were similarly dozing. Lucian's eyes drifted from the pages to the storm outside, but he stayed alert for any change in their journey. Without warning, the train began to slow. The familiar thump-thump of iron wheels on rail faded, replaced by a clamorous wave of raindrops against the window. "Have we reached the station?" Lucian asked, snapping the book shut. Ginny stirred, blinking blearily, while Luna and Colin lifted their heads, woken by the sudden silence. Lucian slipped his alchemy guide into his satchel and peered down the darkened corridor. "Doesn't look like it," he said. "Maybe there's been an accident up ahead." He tucked a strand of dark hair behind his ear, suppressing a small smile. He suspected this unscheduled stop wasn't due to any ordinary mishap, but rather a surprise inspection by the Ministry of Magic, determined to prevent Sirius from slipping aboard the Hogwarts Express unnoticed. "An accident?" Lucian and Ginny sprang to their feet as the compartment door slid open. Curious heads, small wizards from the adjoining cars, peered in, trying to see what had happened. Before anyone could answer, the train shuddered, came to an abrupt halt with a metallic click, and the lights blinked out. "Sssss!" A scream echoed through the darkness as two small figures dove into Lucian's arms. Colin and Ginny pressed close, wide-eyed with fear. Lumos! Luna's calm voice cut through the panic. A soft glow bloomed at the tip of her wand, illuminating the compartment in gentle, silvery light. Lucian settled Colin and Ginny back onto the nearest seat, draping an arm around each of their trembling shoulders. "It's all right," he said, his voice firm but soothing. "Probably just a minor glitch. The conductor will sort it out. Everything will be fine in a moment." Ginny sniffled, hugging herself, while Colin pointed a shaky finger at the window. Frost was creeping across the glass, delicate white filigrees spreading outward despite it being mid-July. "How can it be freezing inside?" Colin whispered, shivering. Ginny recoiled, burying her face against Lucian's chest. He patted her back gently. She'd always seemed so courageous, bold enough to race through the forbidden forest, but now the dark spooked her completely. Lucian squeezed her hand. She was still very young. He looked over at Luna, who stood a few paces away, wand at the ready. Not an ounce of fear showed on her face. Even in this unexpected gloom, she looked composed, unflappable. "It won't last," Lucian assured them again. "Just a pause in the power. We'll be moving again soon." He met Ginny's tearful gaze and offered a small, encouraging smile. "I promise." Outside, the frosted window caught the wand light, casting pale patterns across the compartment wall. Inside, the three children huddled together, waiting for the train to stir back to life, reassured by Luna's steady calm and Lucian's protective presence. Lucian watched Luna with a quiet admiration. She truly was the kind of child who could see thestrals. He had just turned his attention back to soothing Ginny when a tall, cloaked figure slipped into the doorway. A mottled, grayish-white hand, pitted with spots and slick like something long submerged, pushed the door open, and the thing's head swiveled slowly, as if hunting for prey. "Ah!" Ginny and Colin both screamed. Luna, pale and wide-eyed, pressed herself against Lucian's side. "It's a Dementor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The foulest of dark creatures. They drain your soul just by being near." Panic seized the others, but Lucian remained calm. He raised his palm and traced a shimmering glyph in the air. Light gathered on his fingertips, coalescing into a small, glowing rune. "Rain of light," he intoned. In this world, only the Patronus charm was known to repel Dementors, and Lucian suspected his holy light magic might not work. Still, he had to try. If it failed, he at least knew he could fall back on the traditional charm. With that thought steadying him, he unleashed the beam of pure radiance directly at the looming figure. They weren't hairy and carried none of Voldemort's fragmented soul, so Dementors wouldn't target them, at least not willingly. Summoning the power of the holy light, Lucian drew a brilliant arrow of radiance and loosed it straight at the nearest wraith. The moment the creature sensed the arrow's purity, its body shuddered and a bone-chilling shriek tore from its hollow throat. Before it could flee, the arrow struck true, erupting in blinding light and reducing the wraith to a smoking ash pile. Chapter 217, I Really Didn't Mean It. Update 1. Lucian stared at the wisp of ash where the Dementor had stood and blinked in surprise. He'd only meant to test whether fairy tales, light-based magic, would affect a Dementor the way a Patronus charm would. Could it repel them, or even harm them? He certainly hadn't expected the creature to disintegrate in an instant. "How am I going to explain this to the Aurors?" he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Dementors weren't mere dark creatures. They were official Azkaban guards under the Ministry of Magic. And he hadn't attacked them in malice. He'd been on duty aboard this train, just like they were. It would look extremely suspicious if reports came in that he'd outright destroyed 2 Dementors with a single spell. Lucian thought it through. Then he realized the Ministry hadn't warned Hogwarts, or any of the students on the train, about this Dementor deployment. From the moment one of the creatures peered in through the door, he'd reacted instinctively. Any reasonable witch or wizard would have done the same. Self-defense would be the only logical explanation. Now he only had to hope the Aurors agreed. No one could deny that Dementors might attack them. After all, they had once breached the Hogwarts Express's third-year car to assault Harry Potter. That was an indisputable fact. As if drawn by the terrified screams echoing down the corridors, Dementors abandoned their posts in other carriages and surged toward the sound. Though soulless, Dementors are far from mindless. They can understand wizard speech and long ago forged an uneasy truce with the Ministry of Magic, serving as Azkaban's wardens in exchange for a steady supply of human despair. Later, they even struck a bargain with Voldemort himself, aiding his assault on Hogwarts. So when someone's companion cries out in terror, the Dementors answer without hesitation. Lucian and his friends slipped into the second-class compartment. At the threshold lay grisly, ashen husks where prior victims had stood, a telltale sign of Dementor attack. Within the cramped space, several Dementors hovered, their ragged cloaks drifting as wide, empty mouths opened in silent shrieks. They lunged forward, intent on consuming fresh souls. Lucian sprang to his feet, wand at the ready. "I'd advise you not to be so impetuous," he warned them, voice steady despite the chill pressing in. He drew a deep breath and called upon the brightest magic he knew. "Field of light!" Blinding radiance burst forth from his wand tip, flooding the compartment with warm, golden brilliance. The Dementors recoiled as if burned, their hollow shapes retreating with piercing wails. Driven back by the purity of his light, they fled down the corridor, leaving Lucian and his friends shaken, but unharmed in the sudden silence. Other second-year students in the same compartment couldn't help but notice the sudden commotion around Lucian and craned their necks to see what was happening. At the front of the train, the Aurors escorting the driver caught wind of the disturbance in the second carriage and hurried to inform their superior. Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror office, gave a sharp command. "Find out what's going on in carriage 2, now!" In an instant, several Aurors apparated to the doorway of the compartment. One of them murmured, "The minister's hunch was right. Sirius Black is definitely on the Hogwarts Express." Standing beside Scrimgeour, her pink satin bow perfectly in place, was Deputy Minister Dolores Umbridge. Her rosy cheeks and matching frills did nothing to soften the pleasure gleaming in her eyes at the unfolding drama. Scrimgeour shot her a hard look. "Deputy Minister," he said coldly, "judging by how the Dementors have behaved, it seems they've failed to capture Black so far. Frankly, I believe it was unwise, despite Dumbledore's objections, to station Dementors on the Hogwarts Express in the first place." Lucian Scrimgeour had opposed this operation from the outset, but both the Minister and Deputy Minister had brushed aside his objections. Convinced that Sirius Black must be hiding aboard the Hogwarts Express, they'd ordered him to lead a search party onto the train. Dolores Umbridge's lips curled into a sneer. "Scrimgeour, do remember your station," she purred. "You're the head of the Auror office, not a Hogwarts professor. Your only duty here is to obey the orders of the Minister, and mine. In the British wizarding world, the Minister of Magic outranks any school headmaster. I trust that's perfectly clear." Lucian squared his shoulders. "Albus Dumbledore is the greatest wizard of our time. His wisdom guides the entire magical community. I only wish the Minister, and you, would give his counsel the weight it deserves." Umbridge's cheeks flushed an ugly shade of pink. She had no riposte, so she turned on her heel with a disdainful snort and stalked away. At that moment, a young Auror who'd been scouting the train apparated back into the office. "Sir, we didn't find Sirius Black, but we did discover something else." Lucian's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" "Now hurry up and tell me why you're stammering." When Umbridge realized Sirius wasn't responsible, her fury only grew. Lucian, the young Auror, opened his mouth to speak, but found himself rooted to the spot. Seeing his hesitation, Umbridge's voice cut through the tense silence. "Spit it out." Lucian gathered himself. "It wasn't Sirius. A second-year wizard killed one Dementor and drove off the others." His words seemed to hang in midair. Scrimgeour and Umbridge exchanged incredulous looks. "A second-year killed a Dementor?" Scrimgeour repeated. "Are you certain you haven't lost your mind?" Dementors terrified even the most experienced Aurors. Only the Patronus charm could keep them at bay, never kill them outright. The idea that such a creature had been slain, and by a student, sounded preposterous. Lucian pressed on, his voice steady despite his own doubts. "Multiple witnesses, young witches and wizards, saw it happen, and we've recovered the remains of the Dementor." Umbridge narrowed her eyes. "Recovered the remains? Explain." Lucian nodded. "We brought them in for analysis. Every independent Auror team investigating came to the same conclusion. It's the truth, even if it sounds impossible." "Take us to see it." Scrimger ordered. He and Umbridge hurried after the young Auror to the second-year carriage platform. There, scattered across the snow-dusted ground, lay what remained of the Dementors. Kneeling beside their broken forms was Lucian, his wand still raised, an Auror's recording charm fixed upon him. "Good afternoon, Minister Scrimger," Lucian called out, rising at once. Scrimger studied him for a long moment. Then his eyes widened. You're the boy Tonks calls Dora, aren't you?" Lucian's tousled hair and earnest face had changed since the previous year, but the minister recognized him immediately. He'd heard of Lucian's remarkable year, selection for the international Quidditch squad, the French Medal of Courage. "Right," Scrimger said. "From now on, I suppose I should call you Lucian. So tell me, did you do this? Did you kill the Dementors?" "Minister, I swear I didn't mean to," Lucian protested, voice trembling. He glanced at the Auror, then back at Scrimger. "I didn't even realize they were searching for Sirius. When those cloaked figures moved toward us, I thought they were about to attack, so instinct took over. I used that new defensive charm we've been experimenting with, and, well, I never imagined it would destroy them so completely." Umbridge stepped closer, her thin lips curving into a skeptical smile. "A most convenient explanation," she murmured, but her eyes stayed locked on the shattered wraiths. Lucian's gaze flicked to the remains. "I know how it looks, but I never set out to kill. I just wanted to protect myself and the others." Silence stretched as Scrimger weighed the boy's words. Finally, he lowered his wand and inclined his head. "Very well, Lucian. We'll need your full report and the Auror's recording of this event. Until then, no one moves." Lucy, and exhaled, stiff with relief and dread. He could only hope his story would hold, and that the consequences of an accidental triumph wouldn't be more fearsome than any Dementor's kiss. "Impossible. You're barely more than a child, and yet you've just performed magic powerful enough to destroy Dementors? Are you in league with Sirius Black? He apparently hid in your carriage, slaughtered the Dementors, then leapt out and vanished." Umbridge brushed Scrimger aside and locked her steely gaze on Lucian. Lucian's eyes flicked over the plump, middle-aged witch in pink, and he found the edge of his patience. "Madam, you're welcome to eat whatever you like," he said coolly. "But you can't just say whatever pops into your head. I don't know any Sirius, and I've never been related to him, so why on earth should I do him a favor? If you'd bothered to ask Mr. Scrimger about my background, you wouldn't be spouting such nonsense." He paused long enough to let the insult sink in, then tossed his head. "Besides, inventing new magic isn't that big a challenge. I created flying charms in my first year, and more recently I devised a spell that can fell Dementors. What's so astonishing about that? Don't compare your feeble pig brain to a magic prodigy." At his words, brilliant white wings unfurled from his back, arching outward in flawless symmetry. A soft, golden radiance pulsed around him, bathing the room in warm light. Lucian looked every inch a celestial being, so much that the young apprentices clustered nearby fell silent, their jaws slack, and even the Aurors lining the walls exchanged startled glances. He wasn't the awkward first year anymore. His power was no secret now, and he had no intention of hiding it. When the moment called for confidence, he would rise to it, proud, unrestrained, and utterly certain of his gifts. With Lucian's declaration, neither Umbridge nor even Dumbledore had any leverage left. He openly claimed that every spell he demonstrated was his own invention, drawn from a realm beyond this world, impossible for any Hogwarts witch or wizard to replicate. Who could possibly challenge such a proclamation? Umbridge's cheeks flushed crimson, her outrage barely contained as she glared at the second-year wizard who dared address her, the Deputy Minister of Magic, with such irreverence. Scrimger, on the other hand, watched her with undisguised satisfaction. He had long scorned Umbridge's lack of real ability, her endless sycophancy and obsession with self-promotion. "Enough," Scrimger said, cutting her off before she could erupt further. "It was an accident. Let Lucian rest. He's earned it. The train departs shortly, and we'll reach Hogsmeade Station in under an hour." Umbridge opened her mouth to protest. "But that boy, he killed a Dementor." Scrimger raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Deputy Minister, we still haven't located Sirius Black. The Minister himself will have to apologize to Dumbledore for halting the Hogwarts Express without authorization and permitting a Dementor to search the carriages. Mess with this student again, and you'll only make things harder for the minister. Umbridge's voice was low and cold. Sending Dementors to search the Hogwarts Express without Dumbledore's approval had been a reckless gamble. Had they found Sirius, perhaps she could have defended the decision. But they found nothing, and that blunder would embarrass both the headmaster and the outraged parents of the students. No one wanted to see Dumbledore's authority so brazenly challenged. His influence in the wizarding world ran deep, and if he refused to sanction further Dementor patrols, her next plan, to station them at the castle gates to keep Sirius out, would collapse as well. Recognizing how badly she'd miscalculated, Umbridge fell silent. She snorted in annoyance, then apparated away. This spot still lay outside Hogwarts's protective wards. Here, she could still use apparition without restriction. Lucian, very impressive. Study hard at Hogwarts, and one day you'll be as great a wizard as Dumbledore. As Professor Scrimgeour spoke, Dolores Umbridge swept out of the compartment in a huff. The Minister of Magic reached over, gave Lucian's shoulder a firm clap, and offered him an approving smile. He never would have guessed that the boy once taken in and tormented by a dark wizard would be so gifted. In just a single year, Lucian's power had blossomed in ways no one had anticipated. "I won't let you down," Lucian replied, extinguishing the soft glow of his spell. The phantom wings he'd just conjured folding back into nothingness. Scrimgeour signaled to the Aurors, who retreated silently as the Hogwarts Express gently lurched back into motion. In an instant, Lucian became the talk and the spectacle among the young witches and wizards. For the next hour, curious students pressed their faces against compartment windows, craning for a glimpse of the boy prodigy. News traveled fast, and soon heads peeked in from neighboring carriages, too. Eventually, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and their friends swept into Lucian's compartment, brimming with questions. He filled them in on what had happened, though in truth, there was little to tell. Harry had never actually been attacked by the Dementors. Lucian suspected that the soul-sucking creatures had merely been drawn by Harry's fear, searched his hiding spot, then slunk away in frustration once they found nothing to feed on. A small twist, he thought, but hardly worth dwelling on. Before he could blink, the whistle blew, and the train rolled to a stop. Hogwarts Station was waiting, its Gothic arches silhouetted against the twilight sky. Lucian stood, adjusted his robes, and stepped onto the platform, ready for whatever the new school year would bring. Chapter 1. Return to the Castle. Once again, the first-year students crossed the dark lake in little boats, lanterns bobbing on the rippling surface. Lucian, along with the older students, climbed into the silent thestral-drawn carriages, an unsettling sight to anyone who hadn't yet learned they were harmless. As the forest thinned, the turrets of the castle rose before them, lights glimmering in the dusk. They went straight into the Great Hall for the sorting ceremony, a formality that this year's returnees already knew by heart. When the last first year took their place at a house table, the clatter of plates and the murmur of students died away. Professor Dumbledore stood, smiling benignly, and tapped his goblet to call for attention. "Welcome back," he began. "Before we dine, a few announcements. First, Dementors will guard every entrance and exit until Sirius Black is caught. I urge you all not to approach or provoke them under any circumstances. Second, I am pleased to introduce 2 new members of our faculty. Please join me in welcoming Remus John Lupin, our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and Rubeus Hagrid, who will teach care of magical creatures. We trust you'll give them the warm Hogwarts welcome we're known for." A ripple of applause swept the hall as Lupin and Hagrid stood and bowed, their features serene yet watchful. When the feast ended, Lucian rose from the Slytherin table, intending to head back to the common room. As he passed under Professor McGonagall's stern gaze, he saw her gesture toward Hermione Granger, who lingered by the staff table. McGonagall called her over in a low voice. Hermione's cheeks flushed, and she glanced anxiously back at Lucian. Before he could reach her, Professor Snape swooped in, his black robes swirling. "Care to join me, Mr. Lucian?" he drawled. Lucian's heart skipped. "Dean, what is it?" Snape shot a quick glance around, then led him up the grand marble staircase at the back of the hall. Lucian guessed the reason before he even heard it. "You're wanted in the headmaster's office," Snape said, his voice ice cold. "Dumbledore wishes to know more about what happened on the train." Lucian swallowed. "And Hermione?" he managed, nodding toward the portrait gallery opening onto the hall below, where he'd last seen her being summoned. Snape gave him a withering glance. "I believe Professor McGonagall will fill her in shortly. Now, off you go." Clutching his robes, Lucian straightened his shoulders and followed Snape's retreating figure. Whatever awaited him in Dumbledore's office, he steeled himself to tell the whole story. If you want to find out what happened on the train, you shouldn't bring Hermione with you. Ginny, Colin, and Luna are fine, but she and Lucian aren't in the same room. Snape glanced over at Hermione and said, "She wasn't sent to the headmistress's office. Profess, or McGonagall went to see her alone. That's actually good, so don't worry." At Snape's words, Lucian's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what was coming. McGonagall was about to hand Hermione a time turner. The time turner was notorious among magical artifacts for its volatility. It could rewind time by up to 5 hours, powered by the hour reversal charm. In the original textbooks, Hermione and Harry used a time turner to relive 5 hours and save both Sirius Black and Buckbeak. Lucian had pored over every treatise on temporal magic he could find, and they all carried the same dire warning. Time magic is perilously unstable. One wrong move could erase your past and future selves, obliterating you from existence, and it might even ripple outward, disrupting generations of witches and wizards to come. Chapter 219, Showdown. No More Pretense. Eloise Mintob was a quiet, brilliant witch within the Department of Mysteries. Driven by her obsession with time, she devised a daring experiment, using a time turner to transport herself to the year 1402. According to the device's specifications, she should have been able to slip back only a few hours, but something went horribly wrong. Eloise found herself stranded in the distant past for 5 full days. When she finally returned to the present, the consequences were catastrophic. Her body had accelerated through 500 years of aging in an instant. The magical strain was irreversible. Carried to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, she perished of old age within hours of admission. Worse still were the temporal side effects of her voyage. Everyone Eloise encountered in 1402 saw their life paths rewritten. At least 25 people ceased to exist in the present, rendered never born. Time itself seemed unmoored. One Tuesday dragged on for 2.5 days. A Thursday lasted less than 4 hours. And even when used according to the book, the time turner could not stop time's unyielding march. Now, Lucian stood before the wreckage of Eloise's experiment. He felt the weight of what lay ahead. This was no longer merely a contest of magical prowess or intellectual cunning. It was a battle to preserve the integrity of history itself. The pretense was over. The showdown had begun. Like Hermione once did with her time turner, stacking extra hours to tackle every subject at once and nearly collapsing under the strain, Lucian has been secretly extending his study days by slipping in extra time. Officially, he studies only 8 hours. In reality, his personal temporal device grants him over 10. His body, however, feels the full toll of those 10+ hours, leaving him perpetually exhausted. Worse still, by drawing on future time, Lucian ages faster than his classmates. While they live a single year, he effectively lives 2, banking a year from tomorrow to fuel today's productivity. It may boost short-term efficiency, but it comes at the expense of his own lifespan. The Ministry of Magic, fully aware of these risks, has outlawed the spell that powers any hour reversal device. All existing time turners are now locked away in the Time Hall of the Department of Mysteries, and hundreds of strict regulations govern their creation, transport, and use. In the eyes of the Ministry, there is simply no safe way to shortcut time. Lucian knew that, outside of extraordinary circumstances, applications for time magic, and especially for a time converter, were almost never approved. All the same, he couldn't hide his excitement. Time magic was one of the most advanced disciplines in any world, even if its laws varied from realm to realm, and even if you couldn't rewrite established history, mastering it still offered tremendous benefits, boosting study efficiency, catching up on years of research in mere hours, or simply extending one's personal timeline. After all, he had effectively all the time in the universe at his disposal. Borrowing a few extra hours from tomorrow meant nothing to someone with infinite tomorrows. Securing a time converter was one thing. Truly mastering the sealed hour reversal spell was quite another. Lucian cracked his knuckles and smiled. It was about time he showed everyone what he was really capable of. Leaving Professor McGonagall and Hermione on the 8th floor corridor, Lucian fell in step beside Professor Snape. Together, they made their way through the winding corridors of the castle until they reached the heavy oak door of the headmaster's office. Snape rapped twice, pushed the door open, and led Lucian inside. Albus Dumbledore looked up from a surprisingly muggle volume, a book on knitting techniques. He laid it carefully on his desk, then offered a genial nod. "Please have a seat." Lucian sat down opposite the headmaster, heart pounding with anticipation. This was the moment he'd prepared for. Now all that remained was to see, on Vince Dumbledore and the Ministry, that he was worthy of the greatest power over time itself. Professor Snape closed the door to Dumbledore's office behind him and took a seat across from the headmaster's desk. Albus Dumbledore's gaze was steady, but the worry lines at the corners of his eyes betrayed his concern. "Severus," he began softly, "the Ministry of Magic apparently deployed Dementors on board the Hogwarts Express without our knowledge. In the ensuing panic, your student, Lucian, struck out and, regrettably, killed a Ministry official by mistake. I need to understand what happened." Snape leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Albus, Hogwarts students must learn to look after themselves. Lucian, my last protege, acted on instinct when the Dementors began their search. Had he hesitated, who knows what might have happened to the other first years. Whether the minister wants to lay blame or not, a swift defense was better than leaving him defenseless. All things considered, I can't help but think that placing him in Slytherin was the right call." Half a corridor away, Lucian sat against the window in his compartment, listening through the thin walls. Relief washed over him at Snape's words. Despite his reputation for being harsh, the potions master was fiercely protective of his students. Lucian had come to realize that, of all the heads of house, Severus Snape might not be the most conventionally fair or compassionate, but he was the one teacher determined to shield his children at any cost. It was that same loyalty, Lucian knew, which had kept Snape from revealing Scabbers as Peter Pettigrew years ago. Sirius Black might be innocent now, but he and James Potter had tormented Snape in their school days. Only Dumbledore had ever taken Snape under his wing, supported him, and shown him kindness. It was no wonder Snape extended that devotion in turn to his last disciple, Lucian. He hadn't planned to clear Sirius's name just yet. He was content to let him suffer a little longer, anything to keep Severus Snape placated. He would deal with the matter in due time, so long as Peter Pettigrew remained in custody and couldn't slip away to help Voldemort return. "Severus," Dumbledore said with a kindly smile, "I'm not criticizing Lucian. After all, he acted bravely to protect his classmates by driving off and even destroying that Dementor. What I'd really like to understand is the magic he used to do it. He'd been astonished when Minister Fudge reported that Lucian had killed a Dementor outright. In the entire wizarding world, no one had ever managed such a feat. Dementors and the Ministry of Magic have a carefully maintained agreement. The Dementors serve as guards of Azkaban, and in return, they're permitted to feed on prisoners' happiness. Yet they never run rampant, because although wizards cannot destroy Dementors, no killing curse or other spell accomplishes it, they can conjure a Patronus charm to drive them away and confine them to a chosen place. That, until now, was the extent of the world's defense against these dark creatures. Lucian tapped the side of the enchanted box, a perfect cube woven from a traceless extension charm and reinforced with multiple sealing spells. "The Dementors can't escape," he explained, "and without a victim's fear to feed on, they'll eventually fade away from sheer starvation." Professor Snape's dark eyes narrowed. "So this is an original spell you devised yourself?" Lucian glanced at Snape, then shifted his gaze to Professor Dumbledore, who watched with a gentle, encouraging smile. In all of Hogwarts, no one rivaled Lucian's reputation for raw talent. By the end of his first year, he'd already demonstrated a magical knowledge base on par with most seventh years. His dueling skills were exceptional, and he'd even pioneered a new form of flight magic, an achievement unheard of among first and second years. That he could now confine Dementors in a self-constructed prison left even a seasoned potions master like Snape impressed. Snape's surprise lingered in the silence. To him, magical invention was as much about fortunate accidents as it was about technical mastery, and Lucian's current level of study hardly suggested he'd reached that point. Yet here he stood, evidence in hand. Lucian hesitated, meeting the professor's expectant eyes. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Not entirely," he admitted. "I built on a core theory from—" He paused, gathering his thoughts before revealing the rest of his secret. Lucian sat quietly, steeling himself to end the deception. At first, he'd planned to claim he'd devised an entirely new spell, an offshoot of the Patronus charm capable of destroying Dementors. After all, Amy had taught him that very spell, and he could demonstrate it on the spot. But during the train journey, he'd found too many holes in his story. With Dumbledore's and Snape's astute grasp of magic, they wouldn't buy a word of it. Chapter 220, Magic Taught by the Gods, 4th Update. Lucian sat back and frowned. By his reckoning, his grasp of this world's arcane laws was nowhere near sufficient to devise, let alone master, a spell capable of killing a Dementor. Flight charms, perhaps. Even Voldemort once rediscovered that art, and its echoes were easy enough to recognize. But a direct anti-Dementor spell? There was simply no precedent, and Lucian had never studied those creatures' weaknesses. If a killing curse had emerged in his hands, it must have been a complete fluke, an accidental convergence of magical energies he didn't yet understand. On top of that, the magic of fairy tale operated on entirely different principles than the sorcery practiced here. In Magnolia, every major incantation was framed by elaborate magic circles, runic glyphs swirling in midair, glowing with the caster's intent. By contrast, local spellcasters wove their charms more fluidly, without visible sigils. Lucian still lacked the insight to translate fairy tale's structural magic into techniques sanctioned by this world's arcane theory. In short, he couldn't yet interpret his old spells through the lens of these new magical laws, and any attempt to do so would likely fizzle, or worse, backfire. He knew one thing for certain: the gods who guided this realm's magic were not to be trifled with. If they had granted him some divine spark of inspiration, it was far beyond his current skill to harness or replicate. For now, he would have to study, experiment, and accept that genuine mastery might lie far down the road, and that some miracles, accidental or otherwise, defied all explanation. Lucian studied the stern faces of Snape and Dumbledore, weighing his words carefully. An ordinary wizard might have gotten away with a half-truth about its origin, but these two wouldn't be fooled by a tale of magic inspired by the Guardians. They'd spot a lie immediately. In the past, that suspicion would have left him vulnerable, his life hanging on his next choice: admit everything, or trust that Snape's loyalty and Dumbledore's pragmatism would shield him. Back then, he might have clung to silence, convinced that withholding the truth was the only way to stay alive. Now, however, Lucian felt an unfamiliar surge of confidence in his own power. Even if Dumbledore chose to turn against him, he was certain he could defend himself. All he had to do was demonstrate his strength. If Dumbledore saw in him the central figure in the fight against Voldemort, or even the one destined to end the Dark Lord's reign, and vowed to train him without reservation, so much the better. That kind of alliance would free Lucian from endless worry about his magic's true nature or the world it came from. Of course, he wasn't naive. He would never expose the secret of his otherworldly studies or admit that his spellcraft belonged to a realm far beyond Hogwarts' walls. He would play his cards close, reveal only as much as needed, and let his power do the rest. "Not quite. What do you mean by that?" Snape asked, narrowing his eyes. The potions master frowned inwardly. Had Lucian merely discovered some obscure, ancient spellbook and then arrogantly claimed he'd invented its contents? Typical schoolboy vanity, especially in a Slytherin. Yet Lucian's next words silenced all doubts. Because the charm that drives off Dementors and the flying spell I demonstrated earlier weren't my own creations. They were shown to me in my sleep by an old man who insisted he was a god. He's been teaching me all kinds of magic and bestowing special powers. Snape and Dumbledore exchanged startled glances. A god teaching magic in dreams? It sounded absurd. Legends of divine beings had circulated for centuries. Even the lore of the Three Deathly Hallows hinted at otherworldly influence, but no one had ever produced proof. Albus Dumbledore himself, despite his unparalleled skill and his desperate quest to resurrect his sister, had never found any evidence that gods truly intervened in the mortal world. The headmaster's silver eyes widened, and, for a moment, he looked every bit the awestruck child. He cleared his throat before meeting Lucian's steady gaze. "Lucian, that is extraordinary." Dumbledore offered Lucian a kindly smile. "You're the most promising student I've ever met. Even if you can't summon magic on your own, that's not unheard of. Many adult wizards struggle with it. So don't overthink it. Treat it as an ordinary challenge and carry on." Severus Snape's dark eyes narrowed. He had heard enough. Lucian's story was a sham, a clumsy one at that. In Slytherin House, cunning lies were a point of pride, but they had to be convincing. Claiming that ancient gods visited him in dreams and taught him magic, it was an insult to Snape's and Dumbledore's intellect. Dumbledore remained silent, though his slightly raised brow made his disbelief plain. Realizing that words alone would not suffice, Lucian drew a deep breath and let the tension in the room snap. 20 million volts, he announced. Without even raising his wand, a brilliant torrent of electric light crackled across Lucian's skin. He stretched out his hand, and every scrap of metal in the room, knives, vials, the brass fixtures overhead, ripped free from their moorings. They spun violently through the air, circling Lucian as if drawn by an invisible magnet. Snape's jaw tightened. Dumbledore leaned forward, watching the display with both caution and curiosity. In that moment, Lucian's claim was no longer a matter of belief. It was an undeniable fact of raw, elemental power. Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to reveal a faint crackle of electricity dancing across his skin. Around him, loose coins, metal scraps, even a discarded quill rose into the air, spinning gently in the arc of energy. "This is a physical gift my grandfather passed down to me," Lucian told Dumbledore and Snape in a calm voice. "I don't need to utter an incantation or wave a wand. I simply will it." He let the lights dim, and the floating objects clattered back to the stone floor. There are many other abilities, but this hall is too cramped for a full demonstration. Snape's dark eyes widened. He glanced at Dumbledore, then back at Lucian. "Headmaster, this doesn't look like magic." As Hogwarts' resident potions master, Snape prided himself on identifying unusual spells and arcane effects. A silent, wandless release of raw energy was entirely unprecedented, especially coming from a student with no notable magical pedigree. Dumbledore nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Lucian's still form. "Albus, he may be telling the truth." Lucian gave a small, rueful smile. "I realize it sounds impossible." The headmaster tapped his long fingers together. "Yet I can feel the power in that lightning, potent, even unsettling. Before we reach any conclusions, we should perform a proper test." He turned to Snape. "Shall we take him to the Forbidden Forest?" Snape swallowed, then inclined his head. "At once, headmaster." As they exited the hall, Snape whispered to Dumbledore, "There are, of course, wizards born with unusual gifts, legilimency, precognition, pyrokinesis, but I've never encountered anything quite like this." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled beneath his silver brows. "Neither have I, Severus, which is why we must learn all we can." And so, escorted by two of Hogwarts' most powerful wizards, Lucian prepared for the trial that would determine whether his abilities were wondrous or forbidden, or something entirely new. Lucian's knack for discharging electricity at will wasn't so far-fetched after all. He'd clearly been born with the talent. Snape gave a curt nod and murmured a flight charm. In an instant, his form dissolved into a swirl of black smoke. Dumbledore followed suit, his body dissolving into a shaft of white light. Lucian spread his own newly sprouted wings, and the three of them slipped silently out of the office window. Apparition was strictly forbidden within the castle grounds, so even Dumbledore would have needed Fawkes's aid to teleport. Flying was by far the simplest solution. They'd reach the edge of the Forbidden Forest within minutes, and after their business was done, they could return just as quickly and slip back to their beds before anyone noticed. Lucian had assumed that only Snape knew that particular spell. After all, Snape had learned it years ago from Voldemort. But of course, Dumbledore's mastery of magic extended far beyond what he ever displayed. Flight charms would be child's play for someone of his caliber. He simply relied on Phoenix-assisted apparition for most of his journeys. Moments later, they touched down in a moonlit clearing at the very fringe of the Forbidden Forest. Lucian folded his wings and breathed in the damp, shadowed air. Whatever lay ahead, they were already 10 times better prepared than if they'd tiptoed through the castle's back corridors. Lucian took a steadying breath and smoothed the folds of his wizard's robes. "Dean, Headmaster, if there's nothing more to add, I'll begin." He met Professor Snape's cool gaze, then turned to Headmaster Dumbledore. The two exchanged a brief look and nodded in unison.